Lord of Mysteries, I Became the Mayor of Tingen City by author Qing Jiao Shi. Chapter 41-70. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And those who want to support me, I have a Patreon channel, get early access to video on Patreon. 41 Promotion Sequence 8. In August, Tingen is noticeably cooler, with a frequent autumn breeze. The middle-class elites on the streets are still dressed in sharp suits, while the aristocracy wear formal attire. 2 full weeks have passed, and Leonardo, who has just finished tarot gathering, clearly feels that his reader potion has finally been fully digested and is about to be promoted to Sequence 8. Under Leonardo's influence, the servant Drake also became a Beander. With Leonardo's guidance, he began to intentionally play the role of hunter, often going to the forest to hunt, and showing great interest in it. His long hair, which used to be close to his scalp, was cut short, giving him a more masculine and clean look. Ever since Drake changed his hairstyle, Leonardo found him increasingly pleasing to the eye, and the intense feeling he used to have when they made eye contact was gone. The hired female workers continued their daily cleaning duties under Mrs. Wendy's guidance, but the demoness female worker was nowhere to be seen. Leonardo also successfully purchased the necessary materials for Sequence 8, Student of Ratiocination, through Klein. He sold 2 recipes, one for Marauder for the Error pathway and the other for Savon for the Paragon pathway. With 2 recipes and all his savings, he finally obtained the materials needed for Sequence 8. As for Alger, to Leonardo's surprise, Alger didn't ask for any reward. However, out of friendship, Leonardo promised to bring Alger 2 recipes at the next gathering, one for Sequence 8, so that he could exchange it for gold pounds. He also promised to tell Alger a new prophecy. Leonardo had already prepared the prophecy for Alger. He planned to tell him that the sea god, Cavatua, would also perish at the end of next winter. After all, Alger spent most of his time at sea. Although he believed in the Lord of Storms, his sailors also believed in the sea god to some extent. Leonardo believed that the value of this prophecy was enough for him to exchange for the 2 portions of the Beander ingredient. As always, since the last Basic Security Act was introduced, Leonardo has not found an opportunity to push for the creation of a new bill. On the contrary, the charity foundation established by John Maynard has finally reached its peak. 2/3 of the middle class and aristocracy in Tingen City have donated a portion of their wealth. As the founder, Leonardo could naturally take a portion of it to pave the way for his future Beander, but after much consideration, he ultimately did not do so. The truth will eventually come out. If things are exposed one day, the good image I've built up over the past month will completely collapse. The flourishing development of the charity foundation attracted the attention of the king and the royal family, and the name Leonardo Connor began to appear in the Kingdom Council, gaining widespread fame. Furthermore, in their daily conversations, the workers expressed less and less resentment towards life, and instead longed for a happier life, praising Leonardo and the contributions of the 2 mayors Connor. What surprised Leonardo the most was that Dunn Smith successfully advanced to the position of Soul Assurer in Sequence 6, no longer frequently entering his dreams to impersonate others. The only change in the plan was that Dunn did not choose the promotion, but instead chose to remain in Tingen City. Nighthawk's squad. Although this would still increase the chances of Dunn ultimately sacrificing himself, Leonardo did not force him. He could only do his best to help Dunn, and how the other party chose was his freedom and decision. Now that Dunn has made up his mind to protect Tingen, Leonardo can't say anything more and can only try to interfere with or even sabotage in Zhangwill's plans through other means. Relaxed and in a good mood, Leonardo sat at his desk, mixing potions for himself. After lunch, Drake was sent hunting, and Leonardo no longer had to lock the door or live in fear. John Maynard's reputation in Tingen City grew due to the charity foundation founded by Leonardo, even surpassing aristocratic members like Constance, making him the counselor with the highest approval rating. John was briefly immersed in happiness by the people's love and admiration, and he became increasingly convinced of Leonardo's abilities. Since Selena's birthday dinner, Elizabeth's desire to learn about occultism has grown stronger. She attends almost every lecture very attentively and has explicitly told Leonardo that she also wants to become a Beander. Under the watchful eye of Seika Tion, a Nighthawk, Leonardo outwardly refused Elizabeth's request and explained to her the dangers of the Beander world. But he was still secretly planning that once he was no longer under the Nighthawk's surveillance, he could consider giving Elizabeth a potion that was safe, not easily out of control, and easy to impersonate. Leonardo has also chosen a pathway for Elizabeth. Savon. While still in vocational school, wasn't the underage Elizabeth playing the role of this sequence? In this way, when I advance to sequence 5, in addition to Dunn Smith whom I have already taught, I will have 2 more, namely Drake and Elizabeth, corresponding to Hunter and Savon. Leonardo felt a surge of joy at his recent successes. As his thoughts wandered aimlessly, Leonardo finally succeeded in concocting the potion. He poured it into a porcelain teacup, ready to drink it. The teacup was filled with a transparent liquid, as smooth as a mirror, with several blood-red patches. Leonardo endured the visual discomfort, pinched his nose, and drank it down in one gulp. In an instant, he felt his facial features become incredibly clear, his mind both clear and chaotic, as if he were being constantly bombarded with knowledge, bringing him excruciating pain. Leonardo remained calm. He quickly sat down, entered a meditative state, cleared his mind, and fought against the loss of control brought on by the potion. Fortunately, the uncontrollable nightmares that followed my prayers to the Evernight goddess have long since vanished, and this potion is merely sequence 8, posing little risk, it's just a painful sensation that nearly makes me faint. After a long while, Leonardo sat in the armchair and opened his eyes again. At that moment, he found himself able to capture all the clues and his thoughts could follow the natural reasoning. He looked out the window, and with just one glance, Leonardo could almost guess which bank the man in the suit and briefcase on the street worked at. He noticed that the man's eyes would occasionally glance at the aristocratic ladies around him as he passed by. He was almost 30 years old and still single. The other person had recently received a promotion, their suit and briefcase were brand new, indicating they were a newcomer to the newly minted middle-class elite. After his promotion, Leonardo didn't give himself time to relax. Instead, he revisited a recent incident that he found hard to understand. That matter was very strange, it was full of coincidences. Why do people from the demonist sect always come to door, or to the people around me? Leonardo cast aside his doubts and decided to find the answer through reasoning. 42 clues. Mrs. Sharon certainly knows that Annie Heine's assassination attempt on me failed. She can naturally guess that I am Beander, but she doesn't know why I came back to life. Obviously, she can't understand time travel. That's why I was invited to a dinner party by John Maynard, and Mrs. Sharon was also present. This was perfectly reasonable. But after the dinner party, Mrs. Sharon could clearly see that John Maynard was gradually distancing himself from her. In order to get back into John's sight, Demoness came to seduce Drake, hoping to get Mrs. Sharon back close to John through Drake. And Drake's servant was assigned to my side, and Demoness followed him to door. This series of events seems reasonable, but it cannot stand up to close scrutiny. It is illogical and can only be called a coincidence. It is too strange. Perhaps I should think about this from the perspective of 008 and since Zangwill. Under the control of 008, in order to suppress the uncontrollable cravings brought on by the potion, Mrs. Sharon ultimately risked killing John Maynard. This act, both to digest the potion and to cause a complete confrontation between the Conservative Party and the New Party, led to a surge in resentment in the factory district, ultimately attracting the arrival of the evil god's offspring, and Megos subsequently went to the Blackthorn Security Company. In my plans over this period of time, the biggest change in the 008 story should be that Dunn Smith comprehends the acting method and resists the contamination caused by consuming the beyond characteristic left by his teammates. In the original book, after Klein guided Dunn Smith to comprehend the acting method, 008 called it an incomprehensible coincidence. John Maynard's estrangement from Mrs. Sharon also deviates from the story of 008. As the instigator, I am probably already known to 008. Therefore, I have very likely already appeared in the story of 008, which is why my experiences are becoming increasingly close to the main plot. In the main storyline of Tingen City in the original book, I have almost all had contact with the villains. What is now certain is that John Maynard has appeared in the story, but he hasn't followed the established trajectory of 008. Drake's squire has also become connected to Mrs. Sharon and the demonist sect because of my appearance in the story. Another inexplicable thing is that I clearly informed Klein about the existence of the acting method in advance, and he also joined the divination club in advance and started playing the role. Of course I was Klein's first customer. In the original book, Anna, who is also Joyce Meyer, the fiancée of the survivor of the Clover Massacre, was Klein's first customer. But Klein had already joined the divination club beforehand. According to the timeline, it's impossible for Anna to have approached Klein to perform a divination for her fiancé right when I was about to leave. Leonardo's mind raced, and he found things that were previously difficult to think about becoming clearer, with more details and clues emerging before his eyes. He suddenly remembered the description of 008 in the setting collection. Once you know about its existence, it will also know about you and understand all the relationships around you. The more it knows, the more it will incorporate into your story. Although I have always forced myself not to think about anything related to 008, as a transmigrator who has read the original book, my understanding of 008 surpasses that of others. Even if I intentionally avoid making the connection, it is an established fact that cannot be avoided. The more Leonardo thought about it, the more unsettling it became. Unbeknownst to him, he had already been written into the story by 008 and become part of the Zhengwil plan. In addition, there is another thing that can be called a coincidence, which is Elizabeth's study companion, Seika Tion. Elizabeth's father earns only about £3 a week, and hiring a member of Blackthorn Security Company costs at least £15 a week. This may seem like a parent's concern for their daughter, but it doesn't stand up to close scrutiny. Actually, there are quite a few security companies in Tingen City. In the Golden Sycamore district where Elizabeth's family lives, Leonardo knows of at least 2 other security companies besides Blackthorn Security Company. And these 2 are definitely cheaper than Blackthorn Security Company, which is due to the different staffing arrangements at Blackthorn Security Company. If the request doesn't involve the Beander incident, Blackthorn Security Company will send 2 members, one to provide overt close protection, and the other to follow covertly, to prevent any unforeseen events and to prevent the Beander incident from happening. This is also a major reason why Blackthorn Security Company charges more than ordinary security companies. And Elizabeth's mother, Mrs. Margaret, simply for her daughter's safety, spent money to hire an expensive and seemingly illegitimate security company, and was even willing to dismiss all the maids in the house and do all the housework and cooking herself, which is obviously problematic. And the problem is huge. Leonardo suddenly stood up from his armchair, his shirt, soaked with cold sweat, pressed tightly against the panel on his back. With my thoughts clear, I only need one more event to confirm whether I've fallen into the 008 scenario. Lenevis fraud case. Such cases fall under the jurisdiction of the police department, but in the populous city of Tingen, a fraud case involving only 100 people is not particularly noteworthy. The reason this incident caused such a stir in the original work is mainly because it involved the Beander forces. Leonardo clearly remembers that the Lenevis scam occurred at the end of July, which was not long ago, but as the mayor, he was unable to learn the details for a long time. Naturally, the councillors would try to minimize the news of the scam and reduce its impact in order to maintain their party's support and reputation among the public. If the way the name Lenevis appears is coincidental enough, then it can be definitively confirmed that I have become a character created by 008. When will 008 include me in their story? Was it because John Maynard distanced himself from Mrs. Sharon? Or was it because I introduced the Basic Security for Workers Act? No, obviously earlier. He suddenly remembered that the character of Mrs. Sharon was designed to incite the disintegration of Parliament and the division between political parties. However, if only the mayor himself dies, even though he has little power, it is still a position directly appointed and dismissed by the kingdom. If the mayor is still in office, the parties will not directly break off relations and become enemies, as this would be an offense to the royal family. At most, they would only dare to assassinate in secret, and they had to keep it a secret. Annie Heine's first assassination attempt was part of the plot in 008. The failed assassination attempt and Leonardo Connor's miraculous recovery, in 008's view, would be an incomprehensible coincidence. Perhaps, it wasn't the current time traveler Leonardo, but rather the original spoiled mayor Leonardo, who had already become a character in the 008 story. His appearance as a time traveler led to the failure of the 008 plan, which in turn led to one assassination attempt after another, and Demonis would approach him again and again. Leonardo controlled his emotions, frantically taking deep breaths to calm himself down. Time slipped by second as I pondered, until dusk approached, the setting sun casting its golden-orange glow through the arched windows, illuminating the dim room where the gas lights were off. At the same time, the doorbell rang downstairs in the doorway. Even from his study on the second floor, Leonardo could hear the voices of the guests coming downstairs. This is highly illogical, but the sound seemed to have a certain penetrating quality, passing through load-bearing walls one after another, from the first floor to the study deep inside the second floor, and reaching Leonardo's ears. Mayor Connor. Her voice was soothing and seductive. I am Sharon Hoy. Councillor John claims he has something urgent to discuss with you. 43 The Lenevis scam. Important matter. What does John want from me? And why didn't he send a servant or maid instead of having Mrs. Sharon come directly to the door? Didn't Mrs. Sharon leave John? Why are the two of them getting back together? New problems arose one after another. Leonardo didn't think too much about it. He decided to go downstairs and meet Sharon Hoy. After all, if he didn't open the door and pretend he wasn't home, she would definitely sneak in through the meander. He didn't want to clash with Mrs. Sharon, the villainous little boss, right now. Leonardo changed into a shirt from the closet, took deep breaths to calm himself, opened the door, and met Mrs. Sharon. Sharon Hoy's figure and face were much more beautiful than when Leonardo last saw her, and she was incredibly alluring in her light white bodycon dress. Upon seeing Leonardo open the door, Mrs. Sharon smiled faintly and spoke softly. "Let's go, Mayor Connor. Because the situation is so urgent, Councillor John has entrusted me, rather than a maid or servant, to come to you. Please forgive any intrusion." Leonardo did not respond, but nodded slightly, gripped the substitute wand in his hand, and got into the carriage. Mrs. Sharon sat next to Leonardo, very close to him, squeezing him into a corner, her fair and smooth panel pressed tightly against him. Leonardo, holding the substitute wand, suddenly thought of the meander characteristic aggregation law. Perhaps it's because of the substitution wand that I'm surrounded by so much demoness. Leonardo controlled his thoughts to prevent any impure ideas from arising. To avoid looking directly at Mrs. Sharon, he deliberately turned his head away and began to admire the street scene. The carriage finally stopped in front of John Maynard's private mansion, but this time Leonardo had no interest in admiring it. He was only concerned with why John Maynard had suddenly claimed to have something important to discuss with him. Ultimately, led by Mrs. Sharon, Leonardo ignored her swaying slender waist and curvaceous figure, walked straight into John's living room, sat on the sofa, looked at the overweight factory owner and congressman in front of him, and waited for the other party to speak. After leading Leonardo into the living room, Mrs. Sharon quickly left and closed the door. At this moment, John Maynard suddenly spoke, his expression grave. "Mayor Connor, there's something we've been hiding from you. Just at the end of last month, around the 28th, a fraud case occurred in Tingen City, with nearly 1,000 victims, including many members of our charity foundation. The mastermind behind the fraud was named Lenevis, whose last name is unknown. He raised a large sum of money by claiming that there was a high-grade, large iron ore deposit in the Hornock Mountains of West Velas County. He then left Tingen under the pretext of going to West Velas County to oversee the mining operations. An investigation by the police department revealed that the so-called high-grade, large iron ore mine was merely land that Lenevis had temporarily rented and fenced off. The total amount involved was £10,000, affecting hundreds of people." Leonardo nodded slightly, silently watching John Maynard, signaling him to continue. But John Maynard's answer surprised him greatly. "I want to return all the money that the victims donated to the charity foundation to alleviate their financial situation and living conditions." "Where did you get such noble character? You are a big factory owner, a wicked bourgeoisie." Leonardo appeared to be deep in thought, but in reality, he was roaring wildly inside. In his opinion, given John Maynard's character, he would never have even thought of doing such a thing, let alone doing it. Could it be that in just 1 month, I have influenced him to become a virtuous and good person, and he has started to wholeheartedly serve the people? Stop talking nonsense. Even if it's a coincidence, can't it at least make some sense? Leonardo is now completely certain that he has become an integral part of the 008 story. Maybe I should run away, leave Tingen, and get as far away from 008 as possible, otherwise one day I really won't even know how I died. Leonardo remained pretending to be deep in thought, frantically racking his brains for a solution. He did want to save Dunn and the others, but that was on the premise that his own life was safe enough. The influence of 008 is limited to only about one city. If you want to flee, it's best not to stay in Lowen, but to go to Intis, Fasak, or a more distant colony. What about Dunn Smith? What about Old Neil? What about Elizabeth? What about Klein? If I leave, what will happen to the workers in Tingen City? He remembered Dunn Smith, the Nighthawks captain who was determined to protect Tingen City no matter what. He remembered Old Neil specially brewing a potion for him when he first received it. He remembered Elizabeth and the girl around her age. He remembered Klein Moretti, who was always wary of him but always liked to help him in crucial moments. He remembered how the workers liked to talk about the beauty of the future during their free time, and he remembered the praise they had given him. Perhaps even after he was gone, the ending of the story would not change. Dunn Smith, Old Neil, and Klein Moretti will all die, and the workers will return to their monotonous and arduous work, living in darkness. There might be an even worse outcome. If they can't exacerbate the factory district's resentment through John and partisan conflict, what more outrageous things might 008 do? In the original story, it caused a massive smog in Backland, tearing countless workers and impoverished families apart, leaving behind only a lonely child to bear the consequences of the disaster and spend countless nights alone, longing for his departed family. For the poor, happiness might simply mean being able to live with their families. The nobility and the wealthy class wouldn't care. They wouldn't care about the smog, the lives of the workers, or even the feelings of an orphan. If it has already sabotaged 008's plan, and if it chooses to blow up the factory or cause a terrible plague in order to achieve its goal, who should bear the responsibility for those crimes? Leonardo gripped the substitute wand tightly in his hand. In the end, he made his decision. He slowly stood up, his expression serious and earnest, his voice low and authoritative. Yes, let's do as you say. The charity foundation has been established for a month now, isn't it time to contribute to Tingen? Also, notify the police departments throughout the city to search for Lenevis. He never left Tingen. As soon as he finished speaking, the gold coin in Leonardo's hand jingled and bounced up before landing steadily in his palm. Leonardo silently recited it in his mind. He didn't want to ask himself if staying in Tingen would be dangerous. After all, 008 had anti-divination properties, and even without divination, it was clear that this outcome was a very risky choice. However, Leonardo believes that if he suddenly chooses to run away, all his efforts over the past month will be in vain, and the situation will only get worse. He asked himself the question. Did Klein Moretti sell the Marauder formula to Lenevis? The palm slowly opens, with the king's head facing upwards, signifying affirmation. Lenevis's potion formula was indeed sold by himself. When Klein first mentioned that someone was looking to buy the Marauder formula, he wondered why anyone would pay a premium for it. But at that time he needed to raise sequence 8. I didn't think much about the funding for Beander ingredient. Leonardo smiled faintly, utterly helpless, while inwardly he roared. Fuck. 44 New knowledge. In the ensuing conversation, Leonardo had no interest in talking about anything else. His mind was filled with 008 and Ince Zangwill's plans. With his abilities, he certainly couldn't completely stop 008's plan. At most, he could only protect the people of Tingen City and the members of Nighthawk's squad. Ince Zangwill wanted Saint Selena's ashes, right? Maybe I should just give them to him. Leonardo quickly laughed at his own thought. Take out Saint Selena's ashes. That's practically suicide. It's unclear whether the words of filth charm will work. If it can influence Ince Zangwill with the true creator, it might save Dunn and the others. But I can't just pray to the true creator directly, I'd lose control in a heartbeat. Maybe Selena's magic mirror can help, like Klein stripped the true creator of its corruption in the original book, to create a talisman. Perhaps there's a way in the setting collection. I haven't looked at the setting collection carefully since my promotion. I've been thinking about 008 the whole time. After finding a breakthrough in the problem, Leonardo felt extremely exhausted after a long period of thinking. He then instructed John Maynard to mobilize the police force to search for Lenevis before leaving in a hurry. He didn't ask John to prepare a carriage, because who knew if Mrs. Sharon would interfere again. Leonardo went out alone to the street, hailed a public carriage, and returned home. Just as Drake returned home, he found that Drake had already gone hunting and had successfully caught a rabbit. He was dressed in a dashing hunter outfit, looking very capable, and was currently holding a rabbit by the ear, showing it off to Leonardo. After giving Drake a few perfunctory words, Leonardo quickly went upstairs to the second floor, entered the study, and left the door unlocked. Leonardo sat in his armchair, opened the setting collection, and found that in addition to all the potion formulas from Sequence 8, there were 2 ritual magics, 2 occultism knowledge entries, 7 pages of Russell's diary entries, 2 spell creation instructions, and more settings for sealed artifacts. The 2 ritual magics are the Mystic Ritual and the Mystic Ritual. This is similar to the ritual magic of the past, but it uses the mystic element. This ritual allows direct communication with the great being to whom it is directed, and one can obtain the corresponding spiritual experience or certain assistance. The final outcome of this ritual is unknown, depending entirely on what that great or hidden being bestows. In other words, the knowledge and power that can be obtained through that secret union will vary depending on the individual's characteristics. The second is the life-altering process, which is also the ritual magic in the original book that caused Old Neil to lose control. The 2 pieces of knowledge about occultism are the law of aggregation of beyond characteristics and the method of separating mental pollution within beyond characteristics. The first type of beyond characteristic aggregation law mainly consists of 3 points: attraction between similar pathways, resonance between adjacent pathways, and Saphir attraction. The second method of separating the mental pollution within the beyond characteristic is more helpful to Leonardo. Perhaps he can use this knowledge to separate the pollution remnants of the true creator on the magic mirror and create the words of filth to fight against Ince Zangwill. There are two methods. One is to use an item that can steal the Beyander's ability to steal the residual mental pollution, and then attach the pollution to another mystical item before the theft expires. Secondly, a ritual is performed to pray to powerful mystical items, which are at least level 1, and their feedback is used to shatter the remnants and evaporate the spiritual pollution. Leonardo quickly mastered the first method. He remembered that behind Channy's gate at Blackthorn Security Company, there was a sealed artifact called Blood Thief, which matched the description in the first point. However, how to steal it was a big problem. Leonardo continued reading as he pondered. The 7-page diary of the Great Roussel mainly records the happy life and various gatherings of the great time traveler Huang Dao when he first entered Intis. It also mentions the existence of the Twilight Hermit Order. Apart from that, there is not much valuable information, but all of this can be submitted to Klein, since the other party does not know that he is a time traveler, nor does he know that he actually knows simplified Chinese. The remaining 2 talismans are both from the Church of Storms, a levitation talisman and a water-making talisman. They require tin, which is not rare in Loan and is relatively easy to obtain. After crafting these 2 talismans, Leonardo will have a total of 6 talismans, which can be considered as 6 different Beyander abilities. The slumber charm that puts people to sleep, the requiem charm that subdues wraith and evil spirits, the dream charm that allows free entry into other people's dreams, the lightning charm that uses lightning to attack, the levitation charm that allows one to float in the air to evade attacks, and the water generating charm that commands water elemental attacks. Not to mention, there's also Beyander's Words of Filth. Leonardo recalled a sentence in the description of Words of Filth. Those who can resist delirium and madness may benefit from it. At the cost of becoming devout followers of the true creator, the weak will collapse on the spot and die screaming. Leonardo thought to himself that Ins Zhangwil should be considered a strong person, and if he became a follower of true creator, the scene would surely be spectacular. Finally, there's the setting for the sealed artifact. When Leonardo turned to the page that mainly introduced the sealed artifact, he found that the sticky notes he used to seal 008 were still there. Since the other party had already written them into the story, he might as well remove the seal and know himself and his enemy. 2 new descriptions for sealed artifacts have appeared. The first one is 2081, which belongs to Isengard Stanton's sealed artifact in the original book, corresponding to the reader pathway. Sequence 6, Polymath, grants the user a vast understanding and knowledge, enabling them to identify, perceive, remember, and simulate all Beyander abilities encountered. Even against enemy Beyonders, the user can quickly discern their strengths and weaknesses, and has a chance to imitate them to some extent. The stronger the Beyander ability faced, the higher the chance of failure, and even if successful, the result will be significantly different from the original. The downside is that it keeps the user's brain constantly working at high speed. Once the time limit is exceeded, they will become mentally impaired. It also makes it difficult for users to think about anything else. The second is 2-105, Blood Thief, corresponding to Marauder. Pathway Sequence 6 inches Prometheus, grants the wearer the opportunity to steal an ability from a target within a certain range. Even those with high sequence strength can be stolen, but the chance is relatively small. Within 10 minutes of the sealed artifact taking effect, the person whose ability was stolen will directly lose the corresponding ability, while the wearer can use it skillfully. After 10 minutes, the ability will disappear, and the person whose ability was stolen will have to wait until the next day to recover. The negative effect is that anyone who touches it, regardless of whether they are protected or not, will have their life stolen. At first, it is not obvious, but if they do not break contact, the corresponding external manifestations will appear after half an hour. I really envy this sealed artifact 2081. It allows people to gain the ability to imitate it in advance. This is probably a sealed artifact that every reader pathway Beyander would covet. Leonardo muttered to himself, memorizing all the new information, before finally closing the setting collection and starting to plot against the Blood Thief. If I could borrow the Blood Thief, I might be able to complete the creation of the Words of Filth spell. Perhaps I could ask Klein for help, saying that I foresaw the deaths of Dunn and Klein. I believe Mr. the Fool would be happy to help. But my prophetic abilities haven't been proven yet, you damned Keelangos. Why don't you just sneak into Backland and deliver a package to Mr. Azek? 45 Attempting the secret ritual. During Tuesday morning's parliamentary session, Leonardo was not paying attention, his mind preoccupied with how to create the Words of Filth. He had a preliminary idea. He didn't actually need to steal the Blood Thief at all. It was too difficult, and Dunn, as the captain of the Nighthawks squad, would never lend him the sealed artifact. Therefore, he set his sights on the 2081 ring on Isengard Stanton's hand. If he could buy this ring, use the ability of imitation, to master the blood thief's stealing ability, and then use the 2081 to replace the true creator's contamination residue on the magic mirror, he could create the words of filth. Isengard is a sequence 7 in reader pathway, and in the original book, Leonardo recalls that Isengard had been stuck at this stage for a long time, and one of the main reasons he hadn't been able to advance was probably the lack of the potion formula for sequence 6. Therefore, Leonardo decided to try to have the full Qing, through the grey mist and a secret ritual, imbue himself with more spirituality in order to unlock sequence 6 inches polymath potion formula on the setting collection. With the parliamentary proceedings nearing their end and no better legislative opportunities in the near future, Leonardo issued the order to arrest Lenevis, and then planned to end the session and return home to attempt a secret ritual. Just as he finished lunch and was about to leave Parliament, Viscount Constance suddenly spoke up. Mayor Connor, Count Hall, the Kingdom Councillor of Backland, invites you to Backland for afternoon tea to discuss your recent issues with the Charity Foundation. Leonardo, who had just lifted his buttocks from the seat, sat back down on the cushion and looked at Viscount Constance. Is the message true? Absolutely true. Count Hall has also generously prepared private boxes for you, ready for you to head to Backland at any time. Leonardo crossed his arms in front of him, pondering why Count Hall had invited him. What he had done was indeed remarkable in the eyes of Tingen City, but it was nothing special in the entire kingdom of Loan, and the Count Hall's invitation could be categorized as a coincidence. Could 008 be helping me create words of filth? He suddenly recalled the descriptions of 008's side effects. It will use various methods to kill off its own master. Could it be that 008 is on my side in dealing with its Zangwill? Leonardo didn't think much about it and decided to take it one step at a time. Now that he had a legitimate reason to go to Backland, he might as well try to trade with Isengard Stanton and get the 2081 ring from him. Okay, I'll set off today. During my absence, Parliament will be jointly represented by Viscount Constance and Councillor John. All bills and documents awaiting signature will be addressed when I return. After Leonardo finished speaking, he returned home, instructed Drake to pack his luggage, and took the setting collection with him as he prepared to head to Backland. Daffodil Street, Moretti's house. Klein, who was squatting in the washroom relieving himself, was holding a newspaper when suddenly a floating, illusory gray mist appeared in his vision, the mist glowing with a deep red light. He heard a faint, deep male voice in the gray fog. A man's voice. Hanged Man, or Tower. With a sense of doubt, Klein quickly got up, washed his hands with water, and went to above the gray fog, where he sat in the high-backed chair at the head of the bronze table. On the high-backed chair that symbolizes the tower, layers of deep red stars ripple outwards. Klein reached out and touched it, and the blurred scene appeared. He saw Mr. Tower, Leonardo Connor, sitting in a private compartment of a steam train, decorated simply yet luxuriously, with a black ebony table and a sofa covered with red cushions, and porcelain teacups on the table inlaid with gold and silver lace. Leonardo was the only person in the entire carriage. In front of him, a leather piece was covered with mysterious symbols written in ink, including the eye without eyes, symbolizing secrecy, and the twisted lines, symbolizing change. Behind the leather piece was a deep red candle, its flame flickering in the carriage. Leonardo closed his eyes, lowered his head, and repeatedly chanted the names of the ritual objects. A fool who does not belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who holds the key to good fortune. Immediately afterwards, Klein saw Leonardo's spirit slowly flowing out and into the leather, causing the giant language words and magical symbols on it to quickly brighten, and the dark ink to exude a mysterious aura. Above the gray fog, the entire mysterious space trembled slightly, and the previously still gray-white mist began to move noticeably. Meanwhile, the crimson star corresponding to Tower shone brightly, radiating a tidal wave of illusory light. The light coalesced and transformed into the figure of Leonardo, who was in a pleading posture, eyes closed and head bowed. Klein, sitting above the gray fog, was shocked to see Leonardo already inside the gray fog space, even though he hadn't pulled him in. What kind of ritual magic is this? It actually allowed me to initially enter, or rather, resonate with, it without me actively being drawn in. As Klein pondered this, he heard Leonardo's voice slowly emerge. Great Mr. Fool, I sensed a certain danger, but due to my lack of spiritual insight, I was unable to fathom fate. Please bless your devout believer and grant me more spirituality in a short time, so that I may glimpse a corner of the future. I am willing to tell you all about this prophecy. As soon as Leonardo finished speaking, the tremors of the gray fog subsided, and at the same time, his figure was still vaguely visible on the high-backed chair that symbolized the tower. Klein stared at Leonardo's blurry figure, completely bewildered. Give him more spirituality. How should I do that? Qing thought to himself, as he divided his spirituality into countless strands, merging them into the slowly flowing gray mist. He then used himself as a vortex to gather the gray mist, which was enveloped by his spirituality, into a single mass. As he pointed his finger at Leonardo's figure, the gathered gray mist was thrown straight at Leonardo. Should this be fine? As Qing was making his guesses, he saw Leonardo suddenly open his eyes, his spirituality surge, and he kept praising the greatness of the fool. Seeing that things had gone well, Qing left Leonardo a message as he closed the fog. Need not. The meaning of not using is that Qing, in order to maintain his own image, indicated that as the great being the fool, he was not concerned about Leonardo's prophecy. Back in the real world, Qing, standing in the bathroom, was still savoring the ritual Leonardo had just performed. I need to find out what kind of ritual he used. If this kind of ritual is spread, wouldn't everyone be able to have a party on the gray fog? Qing joked to himself as he walked out of the washroom. Inside a private compartment on the steam train bound for Backland, Leonardo suppressed the excitement of the effective ritual, and after confirming that no one was around and that Qing was no longer monitoring him, he quickly opened the book and skillfully found the page, White Tower, from memory. As before, new sequence content has appeared in the setting collection. Sequence 7, Detective. Main ingredients: liver of a 6-armed naga, ear of a hunter fox. Auxiliary ingredients: 100 milliliters of blood from a 6-armed naga, tail tip of a hunter fox, 20 grams of tranquility flower incense, 10 drops of red or black ink. Sequence 6, Polymath. Main materials: scalp of a deep-sea naga, stomach of a white-tailed red fox. Auxiliary materials: 150 milliliters of blood from a white-tailed red fox, a pair of eyes from a deep-sea naga, proof of having read 1,000 books and passed the test, and new knowledge discovered from ruins, ancient tombs, foreign libraries, etc. Chapter 46 Count Hall, vote needed. Why hasn't the spiritual energy dissipated yet? The authentic ritual is indeed more effective than the pirated one. Before the effects of the ritual had completely worn off, Leonardo flipped through the pages and found the sailor pathway. He plans to use Wind Blessed as a bargaining chip in future tarot gatherings to thank Alger for finding the potion he needed for free, while also easing his financial situation and winning over people's hearts. After Qing found the beyond ingredient needed to advance to Sequence 8, Leonardo also managed to sell 2 Sequence 9 recipes. However, he still couldn't make ends meet and ended up spending more than £300, which brought his remaining savings back down to double digits. In the world of Beander, you can't get anywhere without money. Putting his thoughts aside, Leonardo quickly turned his attention to the setting collection. Sequence 6, Wind Blessed. Main ingredients: 6 crystal feathers of a blue shadow falcon, a pair of eyes of a longan eagle. Auxiliary ingredients: 500 milliliters of high-purity liquor, 1 bone of a blue shadow falcon, 2 feathers of a longan eagle, 30 milliliters of rainwater that has not yet touched the ground, and a wisp of wind when the sun illuminates the horizon but has not yet appeared. After memorizing the recipes for the 2 Sequence 6 formulas, Wind Blessed and Polymath, the ritual's effects wore off. Leonardo's rapidly declining spirituality caused him to feel dizzy and overwhelmed, collapsing onto the train sofa and falling into slumber. Before closing his eyes, Leonardo prayed to the fool Qing again, telling him what he called a prophecy. Divination Club. Qing was idly waiting for his client to log onto the door when a deep red glow and an ethereal gray mist reappeared in his vision, forming a scene. He saw Leonardo slumped on the sofa, exhausted, almost asleep, but still trying to stay awake, muttering his prophecy. Great Mr. Fool, I foresee a devastating blow coming to the Nighthawks squad in my city. They will gradually lose 5 members. The first one was a short, stocky man with short hair. He appeared to be a new member of the team and died in Demoness. The second one was an old man with graying temples and an unfathomable smile that made it impossible to understand his true feelings. He died because of his obsession. The third one was a young man with long, dark hair and a poetic, romantic air about him. His fate was unclear to me, but I guessed he died in a fierce battle. The fourth was a middle-aged man with gray eyes and a deep gaze. He seemed to be immersed in sadness and depression every day, and died as a sacrifice. The fifth one is a good friend of mine. He helped me sell a few bottles of potion formula and also helped me find the beyond ingredient I needed for my promotion. I am heartbroken that he ultimately died in a conspiracy. Leonardo's prayers ended, and he fell into a deep sleep, his spirituality nearly exhausted. Qing, however, could no longer remain calm. He knew the true identity of Tower, and that the city he was in was Tingen City. From the prophecy told to him by the other party, Klein was able to confirm which of the 5 team members each corresponded to. What shocked Klein the most was the last sentence. Is that friend Leonardo was talking about probably me? Am I about to die? In an instant, a deep fear completely overwhelmed Klein. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and goosebumps rose all over his body. What exactly is this conspiracy? Klein's heart trembled, and the eternal gray mist flowed rapidly with it. He quickly took out parchment, conjured up pen and ink, and wrote at lightning speed. Then he entered a meditative state, entered a dream, and began to divine. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Exhausted from his journey, Leonardo got off the car and hailed a public carriage to go to Count Hall's house for the afternoon tea meeting. He was still thinking about the prophecies he had just given Klein. Leonardo knew clearly that his strength alone was too weak. He had to integrate all the resources and hope that through Klein, Dunn could discover Ins Zangwill's conspiracy and save the Nighthawks members who were about to die. Of the 5 people he predicted, the most reassuring was Klein, since he could be resurrected anyway. The reason he specifically included Klein was to draw the other party's attention. With his thoughts scattered, Leonardo took a horse-drawn carriage all the way to Empress Borough, eventually stopping in front of an elegant and refined villa. As soon as Leonardo stepped off the carriage, he was completely shocked by the Count Hall's mansion. He thought to himself that this was the real wealthy class, and Councillor John's mansion seemed rather simple in comparison. The afternoon sun at 3 p.m. as Backland Empress Borough's Hall family villa is gilded with soft gold. Inside the ironworks door, a driveway paved with sharded blue stone winds through geometrically cut blue-blooded rose bushes, the edges of the petals gleaming with a glazed glow. The Ladinian main building rests quietly atop 3 white marble steps, with 7 Corinthian columns supporting a triangular pediment, and honeysuckle reliefs hanging from the eaves casting lace-like shadows in the honey-colored light. As the oak door opens, the floor, carved from a single piece of Tiana emerald, reflects a 12-tiered crystal chandelier, while 2,000 prisms dissipate sunlight into iridescent colors that flow between the champagne gold leaf panels. Burgundy velvet sofas line the fireplace inlaid with lapis lazuli, an amber-colored dragon's blood resin coffee table preserves the veins of ancient ferns, and Fenbot crystal windows filter the courtyard view into hazy Monet-colored blocks. Led by a servant, Leonardo arrived at the living room and met Count Hall and others. He saw Count Hall, dressed in aristocratic attire, wearing a gold pocket watch, and sporting a small mustache, along with his beautiful wife. In front of Count Hall stood a young man dressed as a prince, with round cheeks and narrow eyes. He did not look serious at all, but rather always had a smile on his face. He was young and energetic, and looked very much like Henry Augustus I, who was printed on the £5 note. Upon seeing Leonardo's tall, blonde figure appear in the door hall, Count Hall immediately stood up. His aristocratic manners and etiquette prevented him from quickening his pace. Instead, he walked towards Leonardo at a slightly slower pace. As he approached Leonardo, Count Hall extended his hand with a warm smile. "I bet you're that highly controversial mayor, aren't you? It is my honor to receive your invitation, Count Hall. My name is Leonardo Connor, and I am happy to serve you at your service." Leonardo shook Count Hall's outstretched hand, greeted him politely, and introduced himself, presenting himself as a well-mannered and cultured politician who knew how to curry favor with high-ranking leaders. Count Hall suddenly smiled, his expression not serious, and his gaze toward Leonardo held a hint of curiosity. "I didn't expect you to actually come. You know, I once read some negative articles about you in the newspaper. What surprised me was that you were so polite, like a true heir to a title." Count Hall didn't speak, it was his wife who got up to greet Leonardo. Leonardo maintained his smile. He didn't rush to answer, but glanced at the man standing next to the sofa before bowing slightly to the countess. "Newspapers always love to exaggerate and sensationalize, don't they?" Leonardo replied with a smile. At this moment, the young man standing next to the sofa realized that there were guests visiting the Count Hall, so he tactfully decided to leave. Before leaving the door, he came up to Leonardo and looked him up and down. "Edisic Augustus, your gossip has filled one boring afternoon after another." 47 Chapter 47 Teaching Audrey. Chapter 47 Teaching Audrey. After seeing Prince Edisic off, Leonardo sat down on the sofa with Count Hall. After receiving a cup of Felmer tea from a servant, he heard Count Hall chuckle. "Actually, I know about your past. I'm very curious about what caused you to change so much now. It's quite remarkable that he has transformed from a dissolute young man into a mayor who always cares about the grassroots." Leonardo took a sip of his black tea, resisting the urge to twitch his lips, and straightened his posture to answer. "You know, Count, it only takes one night for a boy to grow into a man. Leonardo maintained his smile. He hadn't expected his scandalous news to reach Backland, which showed just how dissolute the original owner of this body truly was. That's not surprising. It's not much different from the entertainment industry on Earth. As the saying goes, good news doesn't travel far, but bad news travels fast, Leonardo thought to himself. To Leonardo's surprise, Count Hall talked incessantly about his family throughout the afternoon tea. Generally speaking, nobles of high status rarely mention their family matters when meeting for the first time. The main point was appropriate praise. Count Hall compared his second son, Alfred, with Leonardo, saying that at the same age, Leonardo was much more mature than Alfred. His eldest son, Hibbert, has also acquired his own title, becoming a lord and serving as the chief secretary of the Atmospheric Pollution Investigation Committee of the Kingdom of Loan. Leonardo listened attentively, nodding occasionally in agreement, and always with a smile on his face. As evening approached, Count Hall finally mentioned his youngest daughter, Audrey Hall. He claimed that his youngest daughter was not only multi-talented but also had a strong interest in occultism, and only now did Leonardo realize the true purpose of Count Hall's invitation to him. When Leonardo first arrived in the world, he expressed his desire to become a Beander in the council. Although it did not spread widely, it was still very easy for Count Hall, who held a high position, to investigate him. People like Viscount Constance would probably fawn over Count Hall for his commission. After Count Hall subtly revealed his true purpose, Leonardo slowly began to speak. "So, you want me to advise Miss Audrey to give up her interest in occultism?" Leonardo countered, though he naturally knew that Audrey had long since become a spectator, and that she herself had sold the formula. "No, whether or not Audrey delves into occultism is her prerogative, and we have no right to interfere." Count Hall paused here, lowering his voice as he continued. "But I'd like you to take some time to give her the most basic instruction." Hearing this, Leonardo was somewhat shocked. Count Hall, with his status, should have been able to attract many high-ranking officials. Beander really didn't know how he, a Sequence 8, could teach Audrey, who had already become a Sequence 9 and was about to catch up with him. Moreover, facing a spectator for an extended period carries a significant risk of exposure, and Leonardo certainly doesn't want to reveal his tower identity to Audrey, as that would completely ruin his public image. After considering his words for a few moments, Leonardo responded with a question instead of an answer. "My lord, with your power and status, you can find excellent teachers for Miss Audrey, whether from the military or the church. If I may be so bold, I probably know less about occultism than Miss Audrey does." Leonardo was naturally extremely unwilling, but if Count Hall forced him, he had no choice. After all, if Leonardo angered Count Hall and lost his position as mayor, his efforts to sabotage Ins Zangwill's plan would likely fall through. Count Hall calmed down and answered Leonardo's question. "There are too many spies in the military and the church. Audrey is still a minor, and I don't want her to be exposed to political issues too early. The reason I'm entrusting this to you is firstly because of your changes in the past month, and secondly because you don't have any powerful connections or high status, and you don't have access to the real upper class. This will help Audrey's healthy development. I'll take that as a compliment." Leonardo tried to keep smiling. He hadn't expected Count Hall to be so blunt, but even so, Leonardo still didn't intend to accept the other party's request. "Miss Audrey has to teach her, so it doesn't matter whether I'm there or not, right?" Leonardo wondered, pondering how to politely refuse Count Hall, when he heard the other party speak. "No, the teaching period won't be long. It will continue until she comes of age after the new year. If you are willing to accept my commission, I will donate to the charity foundation you establish in Tingen City." Count Hall suddenly stopped and slowly extended a finger under Leonardo's gaze. £10,000. £10,000. Leonardo was almost blinded by this enormous fortune. The entire charity foundation currently has only £3,000 in funds, but Count Hall immediately asked for 3 times that amount. As expected of the Earl who owns the entire Eastchester County, his wealth could probably buy the whole of Tingen. Leonardo was amazed, but also conflicted. This £10,000 charitable donation could save many poor families in Tingen City, but it also risks exposing Leonardo to the public. However, Audrey shouldn't be able to make that connection to Tower so easily, right? After all, my image in the Tarot Club is that of a mysterious demigod. After struggling with the decision, Leonardo finally made up his mind. In any case, Ins Zangwill's plan is urgent. This £10,000 can reduce a lot of resentment in the factory district and prevent the evil god's offspring from having the basic conditions for birth. Leonardo suppressed his excitement, stood up with a smile, and extended his right hand. "Yes, it's my pleasure to serve you. However, I need to handle parliamentary matters from Monday to Friday. From now on, I will come to Backland on Friday afternoons and teach Miss Audrey on Saturdays, how about that? Seeing Leonardo readily agree, Count Hall smiled, stood up, and shook Leonardo's outstretched right hand. It's a pleasure working with you, Mayor Connor. Would you be willing to have dinner with us? I will introduce you to Audrey, Count Hall said. Why not take advantage of a free dinner? Besides, this is the Earl's dinner, which is probably much more upscale than John's dinner. Leonardo nodded in agreement. The dinner was scheduled to start at 7 p.m., and it was around 5 p.m. Leonardo made an excuse to go for a walk in Backland and left Count Hall's villa. He then started asking around for Isengard Stanton's home address. Since Isengard was Backland's famous detective, Leonardo found Isengard's residence effortlessly, in just 10 solitary moments. Politely knocking on the door, Leonardo, led by his assistant, finally met the great detective of Sequence 7, Isengard Stanton. Under Isengard's questioning gaze, Leonardo told his assistant to go outside and wait, then opened the door and said bluntly, "Mr. Stanton, would you be interested in a deal that is absolutely guaranteed to be profitable?" 48 Chapter 482081. Chapter 482081. Isengard Stanton, the great detective, sat in an armchair with a round face, round glasses, and a relatively plump figure, puffing on a pipe. Amidst the swirling smoke, Isengard sized Leonardo up and down, and after confirming that he did not recall such a person, he asked a question instead of answering. "How did you find me?" At the same time, Leonardo noticed a dazzling ring on Isengard's index finger, set with numerous tiny diamonds surrounding a beautiful, emerald green gemstone, its design intricate and exquisite. Just one glance was enough to give Leonardo a slight feeling of headache and physical discomfort. This should be 2081, right? Leonardo wondered to himself, while telling Isengard everything he had learned about Isengard's address and his own identity from the inquiries he had made on the street. Since I'm here to seek a deal with Isengard, I need to show enough sincerity. As a renowned private detective in the entire Backland, finding you is not difficult. Instead of replying to Leonardo directly, Isengard infused his spirituality into the ring, and in an instant, the emerald gemstone shone with a brilliant gold. This should be verifying whether what I just said is true or false, right? Leonardo naturally told Isengard the truth about his identity as a Beander, but concealed his pathway. After waiting for a while, until the golden luster faded and the gemstone returned to its original emerald green color, Isengard slowly asked, "What kind of deal do you want to make?" Leonardo didn't beat around the bush anymore. He didn't have much time left, and he didn't dare to neglect Count Hall, his big spender, so he went straight to the point. "I wish to exchange this ring for the one you have." Leonardo paused abruptly, his gaze lingering on Isengard's reaction. There was no overreaction, so it seems he's still willing to sell, as long as the terms I offer are attractive enough, Leonardo quickly added. "How about a potion formula of Sequence 6, Polymath?" As soon as he finished speaking, Azinger's pupils contracted noticeably. Generally speaking, even Sequence 9 and Sequence 8 of the Reader Pathways potion formula are extremely rare in the entire Loan Kingdom, let alone the Sequence 6 feet Polymath formula. "It's all right, sir. I can wait here for you to think it over." How about 30 minutes? Leonardo, being perceptive, gave Isengard time to think and tactfully left the room to sit in the living room, drinking tea and reading the newspaper. 2081 is key to Isengard Stanton establishing the Beander gathering, but if he becomes Sequence 6 and masters the true imitation ability, the ring will become invalid and will eventually be sold. However, what shocked Isengard was why I had the formula for Sequence 6 feet Polymath, and the speculation about myself. As a detective, Isengard must be very curious about how I know his sequence. Pathway made some guesses. After all, the coincidences seemed rather odd. Thinking about the coincidence, Leonardo's thoughts couldn't help but wander to 008. He had barely formed an idea for 2081 when Count Hall invited him to Backland and even put him, a man who was not particularly outstanding in either politics or the Beander world, in his mentorship of Audrey. This is obviously illogical. After all, how could Count Hall, who loves his daughter so much, entrust Audrey to a stranger like me? Leonardo let his thoughts wander aimlessly. He was fairly certain that sending him to Backland was also part of 008's plan, but as for its purpose, Leonardo was completely baffled. If we disregard Count Hall's entrustment of me to teach Audrey, the issue of occultism, shifting the focus to my receiving 2081, might lead one to speculate whether 008 is on the same side as me in killing Ints. But how can it be so sure that I can definitely get 2081 from Isengard? There's always been a feeling, like 008 wants me to create the words of filth spell to influence Ins Zangwil. Lost in thought, the door to the living room opened, and Isengard, dressed in casual loungewear, slowly walked out. I accept your terms, but I need to verify that your formula is genuine. Upon hearing this, Leonardo put his thoughts aside and focused his attention on the transaction in front of him. Of course, as you wish, Leonardo said, then took out a pre-written potion formula from his pocket and handed it to Isengard. Isengard took Leonardo's recipe, held it in his hand, and at the same time, the ring on his index finger once again shone with golden light. The golden light shone on Isengard's slightly wrinkled face, then quickly faded. Isengard's facial muscles visibly relaxed, and he looked somewhat excited and thrilled. He grinned and took 2081 off his fingers. Although I don't know how you know the value of this ring, the conditions you offered are tempting enough. Isengard handed the ring to Leonardo and began to introduce it with some pride. It is a sealed artifact, codenamed 2081, named Eye of Wisdom, which comes from a reader pathways out of control sequence 6. It allows one to understand a great deal, to recognize, see clearly, remember, and simulate all Beyonder abilities one has ever seen. Even against an enemy's Beyonder ability, one can quickly identify the specific situation, understand its strengths and weaknesses, and has a chance to imitate it to some extent. The stronger the Beyonder ability one faces, the higher the chance of failure, and even if successful, it will be far from the original. Now it imitates Bard, the Pathways Sequence 6 Feet Notary capability, which is the capability I just demonstrated, provides a notarized verification of the authenticity of Beyond Knowledge, including the potion formula. Its side effect is that it keeps the user's brain constantly working at high speed. Once the time limit is exceeded, the user will become an idiot, and it will also make it difficult for the user to think about anything else. After listening to Isengard's explanation, Leonardo put the ring away without putting it on. Leonardo still has many things to think about, and these are all related to 008. If he loses the ability to think, he will become a pawn of 008 and be threatened with death. Take it, it's yours. Also, if you get this potion formula's beyond ingredient, you can come and trade with me, and I will pay you a generous reward. Isengard was in high spirits. After leaving Lindbergh and returning to Lowen, he had been searching for the potion formula for Sequence 6, and Leonardo's sudden visit was a pleasant surprise. After the transaction was completed, Leonardo did not linger. He gave Isengard a brief bow, turned and left the door, hailed a public carriage, and prepared to return to his villa in Count Hall to attend the dinner. The public carriage sped through the streets, the setting sun casting layers of gold dust over Backland as it dipped below the mountains. Leonardo sat inside, his mind filled with thoughts of 008. For some reason, Leonardo felt that this deal had been too easy, even though the terms offered were tempting enough. What bothered him more was why Count Hall had once again appointed him as Audrey's tutor. Leonardo sat in the carriage, deep in thought, when he suddenly remembered his conversation with Count Hall that afternoon. Count Hall mentioned that his eldest son, Hilbert Hall, serves as the chief secretary of the Atmospheric Pollution Investigation Committee. The word, air pollution, reminded Leonardo of a scene from the original novel that left a deep impression on him. Backland was shrouded in heavy smog. 49. Chapter 49 Preparing for the Experiment, Eye of Wisdom. Wednesday afternoon, 15 Howard Street, Connor House. Leonardo, who had just returned to Tingen from Backland, was a little tired. The side effects of the secret ritual caused his spirituality to take a whole day to recover before returning to a safe range. As a result, Leonardo had not been able to settle down to study the Eye of Wisdom. As soon as Leonardo stepped into the door, his servant Drake greeted him with a smile and reported on the progress of the past few days. Members of Parliament are searching for Lenevis, while a proposal to approve more funding for the police department has won the majority of votes and awaits Leonardo's signature. John Maynard and his new party members had completely obeyed Leonardo, while many of the Conservative Party's aristocratic members, including many victims of the steel fraud case, hated Lenevis to the core, and the proposal was passed almost unanimously. Meanwhile, Drake says he seems to have experienced the potion digestion Leonard mentioned earlier, and during the hunt, he unexpectedly meets a retired night officer with excellent fighting skills. Drake believes that the retired officer should be hired as Leonard's bodyguard to guard against any unexpected events. Upon hearing this, Leonardo's eyes brightened slightly. If I'm not mistaken, the retired officer Drake mentioned should be Gawain, the fighting coach done prepared for Klein in the original book. Although the original work does not explicitly mention whether Gawain is Beyonder, this has piqued Leonardo's curiosity. If it really is Gawain, if he really is a Beyonder, he must already be a Sequence 7, or at the very least a Sequence 8. After all, he used to belong to the Knights of Akova. Pathway should be either warrior or arbiter, and this kind of Beander ability that can enhance close combat is something I lack. Well, my spirituality has almost recovered, and it's time to test the effects of the Eye of Wisdom. Having quickly made his decision, and with a touch of curiosity, Leonardo decided to meet this retired knight. Seeing Leonardo deep in thought, Drake quickly added more details, seemingly admiring him. This retired officer was active in the most glorious era of knighthood. More than 20 years ago, his Knights of Akova encountered the Intis Republic's troops with the most advanced weapons. It was in this battle that the Knights of Akova, which had once shone brightly in the annals of history, suffered its first complete defeat. Therefore, this officer of the Knights chose to retire, return to the life of an ordinary person, and go back to Tingen. By the way, sir, his name is Gawain, and he seems to be working as a combat coach in the police department. He was very fair and always gave people confidence. He was like the embodiment of justice. Drake's description further convinced Leonardo that Gawain was a Beander, and also made Leonardo more certain that Gawain's pathway belonged to Arbiter. The Arbiter pathway belongs to the military of the Kingdom of Loan. Gawain, who was formerly a knight and protector of the kingdom, is more likely to become the Beander of the Arbiter pathway than the warrior pathway. Leonardo also recalled the Arbiter in the setting collection. Pathway. The name of Sequence 8 is Sheriff. As his thoughts raced, Leonardo also thought of the description of Sheriff's core skill. A sheriff can designate an area as their jurisdiction, roughly the size of a small town. If officially appointed, the area under their jurisdiction can be larger, but not more than 5 times the normal size. The more familiar a sheriff is with their jurisdiction, and the more trust or support they have from the local people, the more they can unleash their full potential and receive some environmental assistance. Once they exceed the designated area or have just acquired jurisdiction, and are not yet familiar with it, they can only rely on Beander's abilities. If I can copy this skill through Eye of Wisdom, can I designate Tingen as my own jurisdiction and thus gain an enhancement? Leonardo speculated, suppressing his excitement. He began to feel that exchanging for the Eye of Wisdom was an absolutely correct decision. After confirming the initial plan, Leonardo nodded slightly and then spoke. Okay, I can arrange for him to meet me this afternoon. Upon hearing this, Drake quickly bowed slightly, then ran back to his room, took off his servant's suit, changed into his hunter outfit, and left door. Watching Drake's retreating figure, Leonardo chuckled to himself. Maybe I could have him wear the hunter costume at home too, to speed up the role-playing process. Leonardo put his thoughts aside and went upstairs, but stopped at the doorway of the study. For the entire month since his arrival, Leonardo has spent all his time reading, except for official business. Now, he has been promoted to student of ratiocination in Sequence 8. Reading is not a role-playing activity, but rather a means to become a detective like Isengard Stanton. But he was, after all, the mayor of Tingen City. Even if he really put up a sign for a private detective agency, business would definitely be bad. If he just waited, it would be very detrimental to his role. Thinking this, Leonardo withdrew his hand from midair, turned around and left the door, hailed a public carriage, and prepared to go to the police department. Perhaps some difficult cases in the police department can help me digest the potion. I'm just a student of ratiocination now. I don't need to go to crime scenes to collect clues like a real detective. I just need to be able to deduce the real culprit or the truth of the matter. Leonardo thought to himself, touching the deflated wallet in his pocket. Since purchasing the Beyond ingredient from Sequence 8, Leonardo's financial situation has plummeted to rock bottom, marking the biggest crisis he has faced since his transmigration. He also couldn't make money from other sources and could only wait for Klein to help him sell more potion formula. However, Leonardo had a solution in mind. He planned to visit the fortune-telling club and tell Klein to keep an eye out for Sequence 8 in the future. Purchase request for potion formula. The carriage at the police department. The carriage stopped at the door. As Leonardo stepped out, he saw the police badge with crossed swords surrounding a crown. As soon as he appeared in front of the door, a man with a fat face, a smile, and wearing a faded police uniform quickly walked over. Mayor Connor, what brings you to our police department today? The man asked with a surprised but smiling expression. He walked up to Leonardo, saluted respectfully, and rubbed his hands together in front of his chest. With just one glance, Leonardo recognized the policeman in front of him. He spoke slowly, his voice low. Inspector Toll. 50 Chapter 50 Gawain. Chapter 50 Gao Wen. Any new cases recently? Faced with Inspector Toll's flattery, Leonardo merely nodded slightly and walked into the police department without shifting his gaze. The position of inspector is mid-level in the political sphere of the police department, with considerable law enforcement authority. An inspector is often responsible for investigating cases in a particular neighborhood. Upon hearing Leonardo's order, Inspector Toll quickly followed and beckoned his men to make tea for Leonardo. Mayor Connor, things have been very calm lately, no new cases have occurred. Toll paused, then suddenly stood up straight, patting his chest to assure him. Please believe me, if a case does occur, the police department and I will definitely apprehend the criminal and hand him over to the court for judgment. Leonardo has not responded to Inspector Toll. In his view, it is impossible for no case to have occurred. He believes that Inspector Toll is only saying this because he is afraid of being blamed and that it would threaten the position he has climbed up over the past decade. Leonardo noticed that when Toller made his promise, he deliberately put himself before the police department, which would sound like he was taking credit. Looking up, he saw the young police officer who was about to make him tea. He waved him away, signaling him to return to his post, and then adopted a serious tone. Inspector Toll, bring me the most recent case files to my house. Leonardo's voice carried an undeniable authority, almost causing the smug Inspector Toll to lose his composure and turn into fear. Toller felt a cold sweat break out. There had indeed been many bizarre cases recently. He had thought that Mayor Connor's visit was just a superficial inspection and that he would not investigate at all, which was why he had kept it a secret. But once the lie was exposed, Toll, who had received the order, dared not hide it any longer and nodded repeatedly in agreement. Yes, Mayor Connor, I will send it over as soon as possible. Toll kept his head down, avoiding Leonardo's gaze, until the latter spoke again. I need to see the case file tonight. Leonardo glanced at the clock on the table. It was already 3 in the afternoon, and Gawain had probably already arrived. So Leonardo stood up, walked out of the police department, leaving only Inspector Toll with his back turned. I have other things to do this afternoon. Remember, if any more bizarre cases occur in the future, involving the death of citizens, you can bypass the procedures and send someone directly to report to me. As soon as he finished speaking, Leonardo's figure disappeared at the end of the street along with the carriage. Only after Leonardo had completely left did Inspector Toll dare to slowly raise his head, wipe away the cold sweat, and stare at the empty police department door, muttering to himself. Mayor Connor has really changed, just like the rumors said. Inside John Maynard's villa, John, who was processing the Charity Foundation refund, suddenly received a message from his servant, which almost made him lose his balance and fall off his chair. What? You mean our foundation received a donation of £10,000? Have you identified the donor? John slammed his hand on the table, straightened his back, and questioned the servant who had come to report. £10,000 is no small sum. John firmly believes that even he himself couldn't donate such a huge amount in the entire Tingen City, let alone anyone else. Could this be a statement made by the forces behind Mayor Connor? But why donate now, when I'm processing the refund? John racked his brains, completely unable to guess the source of this £10,000 donation, until the servant gave the answer, causing John to fall completely off his chair, utterly lacking in composure. With the help of his attendant, John stood up with difficulty, his legs weak. He patted the dust off his suit, trying to remain calm, but kept repeating a name. Count Hall from Backland. Hall. When Leonardo got home, he found the house empty. Gawain hadn't come to meet him yet. With nothing to do, he went upstairs and habitually sat down in the study to rest. Drake brought Gawain home as the sun was setting. He knocked on the study door to notify Leonardo, who was dozing in his armchair. Leonardo immediately stood up, put the eye of wisdom on his hand, and slowly walked downstairs. As Leonardo reached the corner of the stairs, his gaze fell upon the figure sitting on the sofa, sipping tea and chatting idly with Drake. The figure was tall and imposing, with short blonde hair and graying temples. When he turned his head, Leonardo could clearly see the weathered look on the other man's face, with deep and prominent wrinkles, crow's feet, and nasolabial folds. When Gawain saw Leonardo, he quickly stood up and gave him a knightly salute. After the Industrial Revolution was launched by Emperor Russell, knights gradually faded from the historical stage. This was also the first time Leonardo had seen a way of bowing that was different from the gentleman's bow since he traveled through time. Gawain's right knee touched the ground, his left knee bent at a 90-degree angle, his palms facing upwards and overlapping as he reached out towards Leonardo, his head bowed and eyebrows lowered, muttering something under his breath. Honorable Mr. Leonardo Connor, great Mayor of Tingen City, leader of the people, it is my honor to serve you, Third Knight Master Gawain of the Knights of Ahawashire. Leonardo, feeling somewhat intrigued, first helped Gawain up, then bowed slightly to him with a faint smile on his lips. Mr. Gawain, from now on you will just bow, just like Drake. It is my honor to meet a knight who once enjoyed such glory. Leonardo remarked from the bottom of his heart. Having read a lot of chivalric literature since childhood, Leonardo has a natural affinity for the profession of knight. Now, seeing a living knight, he couldn't contain his joy. What impressed him most was a chivalric novel he read in his desk drawer during a high school math class when he was completely out of touch with the pace. The protagonist is a down-on-his-luck nobleman who still clings to his knightly dreams. He owns only a small horse, his lance and shield are made of wood, his squire is a greedy fellow, and his enemy is a windmill. Leonardo got back to the point, sat opposite Gawain, sized him up, and said bluntly through the door. Mr. Gawain, if I'm not mistaken, you should be Beander from Arbiter, Pathway, right? Gawain was clearly surprised, but his cloudy eyes quickly calmed down. He truly is Mr. Franstone's son. During your father's tenure, we were good friends. At this point, Gawain shook his head and sighed. His passing is the greatest loss to the entire Tingen City in the last decade. Leonardo maintained his smile. In the entire living room, there were only him, Drake, and Gawain. There were no outsiders. So he made no attempt to hide the ring on his finger, Eye of Wisdom. He infused it with his spiritual essence, and the emerald gem shone, reflecting on his cheeks. Leonardo slowly spoke, giving the command. Hey, Mr. Gawain, how about letting me see what your Beander abilities are like? 51 Chapter 51 Sheriff. Chapter 51 Sheriff. Gawain stared blankly at the green ring on Leonardo's hand, but still did as he was told. He began by introducing his first ability. My first Beander ability is the ability to remember the appearance of a target as long as I've seen them in person, in a photograph, or in a sketch, gaining extrasensory abilities on a supernatural level. Similarly, I also have an occultist memory for the routes I've taken, allowing me to detect abnormal elements and grasp subtle traces. When the distance is close enough, I can detect and sense undisguised things related to evil, chaos, and madness. As the sheriff of Sequence 8, my main core skill is jurisdiction. As he spoke, Gawain's cloudy eyes suddenly brightened, gleaming with golden light. Under the gazes of Leonardo and Drake, he slowly stood up, extended his finger, and flicked it lightly into the air. I have appointed Leonardo Hall's house as my jurisdiction. As soon as Gawain finished speaking, Leonardo felt the spirituality around him surge wildly. The gaps in the doors and windows were almost filled with invisible spirituality, as if the doors had been closed. All the furniture seemed to obey Gawain at this moment, standing quietly like taxi drivers with solemn expressions. Feeling this subtle sensation, Leonardo unconsciously felt a desire to submit to Gawain, much like commoners surrendering to the sheriff they absolutely trusted. Leonardo suppressed the impulse, and with a smile, poured his spirituality into the Eye of Wisdom. Immediately afterwards, the color of the Eye of Wisdom changed from emerald green to golden yellow, and then back to emerald green, flickering in the living room. At the same time, the Eye of Wisdom seemed to be feeding Leonardo back, filling his mind with a wealth of knowledge that Leonardo had never encountered before, mostly royal laws and theories related to governing the people. These theories flooded Leonardo's mind like a burst dam, resonating with his modern social knowledge and combining with his past experiences as mayor. Leonardo felt a wave of dizziness, but fortunately, he had gotten used to this feeling of being bombarded with knowledge during the reading phase of Sequence 9, and was able to persevere. Leonardo felt his thinking becoming increasingly sluggish, his brain as if it had rusted, yet it was also as if the Eye of Wisdom had come to life, extending transparent, invisible tentacles that wrapped around his brain. He suppressed the strange sensations in his mind and tried to combine this infusion of knowledge with his previous accumulation and experience to understand and analyze it. After a long while, seemingly noticing something amiss with Leonardo's body, Gawain quickly withdrew his Beander ability, believing that it was his Beander ability that caused Leonardo's discomfort. But soon, Gawain and Drake were both completely shocked by Leonardo, which overturned their worldviews accumulated over most of their lives. They saw the ring on Leonardo's hand flash continuously before settling on a golden hue, and Leonardo's deep blue eyes also shimmered with a golden hue. He mimicked Gawain's earlier actions, slowly standing up, his entire body radiating spirituality that silently permeated the entire room. Until his lips moved. I have appointed Tingen City as my jurisdiction. Before the words were even finished, that vibrant spirituality burst forth from the room, spreading wildly through the streets and alleys of Tingen City, expanding across all districts, from the affluent North District to the Dock District, the Golden Sycamore District to the Factory District. Inside the living room, papers on the table fluttered in the still air, and the plush curtains swayed in the air. Leonardo stood in the center of the living room, his clothes billowing, his blonde hair flying. Leonardo felt that the world was incredibly clear at that moment. He seemed to be able to sense every corner of Tingen City, see the tired faces of every worker, and the dignified demeanor of every nobleman. However, this feeling could only spread to the city's edge and could not expand further. When he opened his eyes again, Gawain and Drake were frozen in place. Even the usually composed Gawain could not help but feel a shock in his eyes. Immediately afterwards, this feeling of spreading and expanding quickly disappeared, eventually only remaining in the North District, leaving only physical and mental exhaustion. Leonardo ignored the shocked looks on their faces and sat down to reflect. As an official appointed by the kingdom, he did indeed receive a certain degree of protection, but this protection was not as strong as Leonardo had expected. He had thought he could turn the entire Tingen into his own jurisdiction, but unfortunately, he couldn't do it. The largest area he could manage was only a section of a few major districts. But that's enough for Leonardo, since the battles he's involved in now don't involve the entire city, at most just one or two streets. Having collected his thoughts and accepted a degree of failure, Leonardo looked up and noticed the shock on the faces of the two people in front of him. At this point, Drake finally calmed down a little from his shock and asked a question, but he stammered a bit. "Mr. Leonardo, are you also from the Arbiter pathway?" Drake doesn't know much about the Beyond world. If Leonardo were to give his opinion, he'd be even less knowledgeable than Elizabeth. Instead of answering Drake's question, he began to observe Gawain. The well-informed Gawain was clearly much more adaptable than Drake. He didn't think Leonardo was an arbiter, like himself, since he didn't feel the kind of charm that arbiters possessed that made people submit and fear them. Of course, having seen many sealed artifacts, Gawain quickly pinpointed the answer. Having found it, he spoke with a serious expression, his tone tinged with pride. "Mayor Connor, no, Mr. Leonardo, it seems you have acquired a Beyonder sealed artifact." Quote. Gao Wen's tone clearly showed praise. Leonardo nodded slightly, suppressing his inner joy. He had only had the Eye of Wisdom for a day, yet he had already simulated an ability. At first, he was worried that the first simulation would fail and make him lose face. Fortunately, the sheriff was only sequence 8, which was relatively simple. Seeing that Drake was still looking at the two of them with a completely blank expression, Leonardo then prepared to explain. In general, his relationship with Gawain was not one of submission, but rather one of cooperation. Now that the other party has demonstrated their Beyonder abilities, Leonardo intends to express his sincerity in return. This is a sealed artifact, from Reader Pathway Sequence 6, with the ability simulation. It can simulate the Beyonder abilities of Seam to a certain extent. After a brief explanation, Drake looked enlightened, while Gawain nodded repeatedly, seemingly already having guessed as much. As dusk fell and the setting sun was completely swallowed by the horizon, crimson as the moon slowly climbed into the sky, Leonardo slowly revealed his intention to collaborate. "Mr. Gawain, would you be willing to become my personal bodyguard? How about £3 a week?" Leonardo revealed a hint of barely perceptible embarrassment when the weekly wage was mentioned. "If I really can't afford it, I'll just ask John Maynard for reimbursement," he comforted himself. Leonardo suddenly pictured Klein's face. He remembered that Klein hadn't helped him sell potion formula for almost a week, and Leonardo had lost his source of income during this time. So he made a decision in his heart. I need to go to Divination Club tomorrow. Looks like we need to push Klein to catch up on his progress. 52 Chapter 52 Fear. Chapter 52 Fear. Please vote and read on. Gawain didn't rush to answer Leonardo's request for cooperation. He fell into deep thought, his cloudy eyes scrutinizing Leonardo from head to toe, making Leonardo feel uneasy. Is this a test to see if I have the qualities to be followed by him? Leonardo did not avoid the gaze directed at him, his mind drifting back to the various oaths of medieval European knights on earth. Humility, integrity, compassion, courage, justice, sacrifice, honor, soul. After a while, the hot tea on the table had cooled down slightly, and Gao Wen finally spoke slowly. He knelt down on one knee again and pressed his thumb to his chest. His voice, like his eyes, was deep and heavy with the weight of history, hoarse yet possessing an authoritative power. Gao Wen lowered his head and lowered his eyes. His voice was not loud, but it still echoed throughout the living room. "Yes, Mayor Connor, I am willing to follow you. Your will be my will." Seeing Gawain kneeling, Leonardo felt he should do something, so he picked up his cane and tapped him lightly on both shoulders. According to medieval European etiquette, Leonardo should have drawn his noble sword at this point, but he was not a true nobleman, as Leonardo, living in the Steam Age, did not have his own sword. But seeing Gawain accept his cooperation, Leonardo was reminded of his own experience teaching various pathways. Mid-sequence Beander grasps the long-term goal of the acting method. In retrospect, Dunsmith is one example, belonging to the sleepless pathway. Drake and Elizabeth are in the reserve, designated as hunter and savant, respectively. Although Elizabeth has not yet become Beander, her parents seem to have developed some trust in Leonardo recently. Instead of spending money to hire bodyguards from Blackthorn Security Company, they have hired several maids to alleviate Mrs. Margaret's recent burden of housework. Therefore, it's time to gradually put Elizabeth on the agenda. Bringing his thoughts back, Leonardo focused on the present. And finally, there's Gawain, an arbiter. Gawain, the sheriff of Pathway, is nearly 40 years old. He may have already finished digesting the potion of Sequence 8 and now only needs to wait for a potion of Sequence 7. Once Gawain advances to Sequence 7, Leonardo can then subtly guide him on the existence of the acting method in his daily life, allowing him to grasp it on his own. Thinking of this, Leonardo felt much more at ease, so he instructed Gawain. Mr. Gao Wen, there are still many empty rooms on the first floor. I think you can move in, and you will also need to continue teaching the trainee inspectors combat techniques. Leonardo suddenly imagined seeing Klein practicing martial arts with Gawain downstairs in the future, looking on with amusement at how he was pushing himself to the limit. Yes. Gawain nodded in agreement and left the door with Drake to pack his luggage. After saying goodbye to the two, night fell completely, and the moonlight from Crimson spilled into the living room, intertwining with the warm yellow glow of the crystal chandelier. Leonardo sat languidly on the sofa, waiting for the maid to come up to the door and prepare dinner for him. Meanwhile, he was also waiting for the files that Inspector Toll had agreed upon, so that he could deduce the truth and begin his role. Time ticked by, and after the indicator slid around and around the dial, the long-awaited doorbell finally rang. Did the case file arrive, or did the female workers come up to the door? Leonardo wondered, getting up and opening the door. The first thing I saw was Mrs. Wendy. She looked extremely flustered, her wrinkles crinkling up, she was breathing heavily, and her eyes were darting around as if she were afraid of something. Mrs. Wendy. Leonardo's gaze passed over Wendy at the front and looked at the female workers behind him. Their expressions were equally tense. They would look back from time to time, but they didn't dare to turn around completely. They only dared to turn their heads slightly. Leonardo frowned. Seeing their panicked expressions, he could roughly guess that something serious had happened. Mrs. Wendy, who often boasted that she had seen all kinds of big scenes, was now as frightened as a startled animal, with obvious cold sweat glistening on her forehead in the crimson moonlight. Leonardo quickly ushered the female workers into the door. Only after he tightly closed the door did the warmth inside briefly dispel their fear and allow them to calm down. Leonardo walked up to Mrs. Wendy, who was doing deep breathing exercises, crossed his hands on his knees, and gave her a reassuring smile with gentle eyes. Mrs. Wendy, don't panic, my house is safe. He first racked his brains to reassure the people in front of him, then asked with a puzzled look, what happened? Leonardo's words were like a boulder thrown into a lake, igniting fear throughout the room. Wendy and the others, who had just begun to calm down, were plunged back into a state of extreme terror. Is Beander's ability amplifying their emotions? That shouldn't be the case. Someone with that ability should be a mid-sequence. Beyond reason, Beander wouldn't be targeting Wendy and the others. Leonardo pondered, taking out two talismans, Slumber and Dream, from his pocket. The female workers covered their heads in terror, curled up on the sofas and carpets, screamed from time to time, and kept muttering words like, help. Finding himself unable to get anything out of him, Leonard tossed the slumber charm with one hand, his lips moving as he uttered a spell in Hermes language. Crimson. In an instant, Crimson's moonlight, centered on the talisman in midair, slowly rippled outwards, like ripples on a lake, calmly and rhythmically sweeping across the living room and covering the bodies of every huddled female worker. The moonlight in Crimson was gradually dispelling the fear in the room. The female workers began to quiet down, their muscles relaxing, their hands, which had been covering their heads, resting on the floor as they slumped into a slumber. Mrs. Wendy, who was sitting on the sofa, was also fast asleep in a very contorted position. The room and its surroundings grew quiet until the ripples of Crimson's light merged with the moonlight streaming through the window. Leonardo's gaze swept over the somewhat messy hall, and a sense of tension welled up inside him. He was almost certain that Mrs. Wendy and several other female workers had been affected by Beander's power. So Leonardo approached Mrs. Wendy, held the round, thin dream charm between two fingers, infused it with spirituality, and chanted the incantation in Hermes language. Nightmare. In an instant, the talisman unleashed crimson once more, its light quickly enveloping Leonardo and plunging him into a deep sleep, yet his consciousness grew ever more acute. When Leonardo opened his eyes again, he was still in a dream. Instead of his own living room, he went to the street corner. It was dinner time, but the houses on both sides of the street were dark, with only the moonlight of crimson shining brightly through the arched windows to barely illuminate them. Immediately afterwards, he saw Mrs. Wendy walking down the street, surrounded by several young female workers, chatting and laughing, seemingly oblivious to the strangeness around her. Mrs. Wendy shared photos of her lovely children with everyone. She has a son and a daughter, and her husband is a dock worker. Although his salary is not high, Mrs. Wendy's hard work has enabled her family to become long-term workers at Connor House, and their quality of life is significantly higher than that of ordinary working-class families. They are happy and content. This drew envy from a group of female workers. However, as they passed a grocery store, a young female worker suddenly stopped in her tracks, frozen in place, her mouth agape, unable to utter a word. Mrs. Wendy and the others seemed to realize that one of their companions had fallen behind, so they all turned around and saw the female worker pointing into the grocery store. Her pupils contracted and her whole body trembled. Following the direction the young female worker was pointing, Leonardo couldn't help but gasp. In the dimly lit room, the goods in the entire general store were scattered haphazardly on the floor, and wooden chairs and tables were overturned, but there was no one in sight. Only when you look up can you see that a hemp rope is tightly tied to the beam at the top of the house, with the end of the rope twisted into a loop, and the loop is connected to a person's head. The head, held together by the panel, struggled to prevent the body from breaking. A dark bluish-black bloodstain was visible on the neck. The corpse swayed in the air without wind, making a sickening creaking sound. At that moment, the young female worker suddenly knelt down on the ground and screamed. The piercing scream seemed to startle the entire street. At the same time, the dimly lit houses on both sides suddenly lit up with a warm yellow light. It wasn't until Leonardo looked inside that he was shocked to discover the truth. Even as a nightmare, in someone else's dream, he was covered in cold sweat and his fingertips were clenched so tightly they turned white. At this moment, almost all the hundreds of households on the street were just like the owner of that general store. He committed suicide by hanging. 53 Chapter 53 Cause of Death. Chapter 53 Cause of Death. Leonardo quickly snapped out of the dream and back into reality, only to find that his shirt was soaked with cold sweat. The female workers were still asleep. After calming himself down, Leonardo began to analyze the situation. Mrs. Wendy's dream location should be in the North District. I can clearly see the exquisitely decorated detached houses. Phew, thankfully, it's within my jurisdiction range. But I always feel that it's unreal. After all, if a case involving hundreds of deaths really happened, the outside world would be in complete chaos, and it wouldn't be so peaceful. Although Drake and Gawain haven't returned yet, I'd better go and find out first. Anyway, I have the substitute wand, so I shouldn't be in any danger. Leonardo thought for a moment, made a quick decision, picked up his wand from the sofa, and stepped out of the door before even changing his shirt. As soon as I stepped out of the door, the moonlight in crimson suddenly dimmed, and a dark cloud drifted in from somewhere in the sky, shrouding the entire city. The peaceful night was shattered by the howling wind. Leonardo hesitated for a moment, then picked up his leg and set off towards the destination in Mrs. Wendy's dream. It shouldn't rain, right? I didn't bring an umbrella. Leonardo prayed silently as he walked quickly away. It was dinner time, and there were very few public carriages on the street. Fortunately, his destination wasn't far from Howard Street, so Leonardo decided to jog there. If a death of hundreds of people, like in Mrs. Wendy's dream, were to actually occur, I would immediately go to Blackthorn Security Company and notify Captain Dunn. If everything is normal there, one thing is certain, Mrs. Wendy and the others were being hallucinated, and the real culprit's target is very likely me. Well, no matter what, I have to go to Blackthorn Security Company to find Dunn. As his thoughts raced, the air grew humid, and a light drizzle began to fall on Leonardo, but his pace quickened. He carried a cane, wore a white shirt, black trousers, and buttonless leather shoes, and ran quickly through several streets and alleys in the darkness until the warm gas lamps were completely left behind. Leonardo paused, standing still, his gaze quickly sweeping across the street before him. The gas and electric lights had stopped working, and the houses on both sides of the street were also dark. Dark clouds blocked the moonlight in crimson, plunging the whole street into a silent darkness, with the occasional shadowy figure of a stray cat darting by. Looking at the scene before him, Leonardo, who was already very familiar with Tingen City, quickly recalled the proposal he had made in the council a few days ago. In the council, the Conservative Party proposed that the electricity system of Tingen City should be strengthened by removing the original power lines and carrying out renovation and reconstruction. The removal of the electrical lines will inevitably cause power outages in some areas of the city. To Leonardo's surprise, the street had been under reconstruction for 2 or 3 days since it was demolished, but it was still not finished. Presumably, the funds had been exploited by the middle class at each level, resulting in insufficient funds and manpower. Using his memory, Leonardo accurately located the grocery store. The scene inside the grocery store was just like what Mrs. Wendy had seen in her dream. The shopkeeper was hanging from a beam, and the floor was littered with miscellaneous goods, tables, and chairs. Gripping his wand tightly and remaining vigilant, Leonardo began to wander through the streets. His gaze occasionally drifted to houses not covered by curtains. His eyes, now adjusted to the darkness, could still vaguely make out the interiors, but they were not as eerie and terrifying as in his dreams. Instead, they were calm and uneventful. The only place on the entire street where a death occurred was the grocery store. Leonardo breathed a sigh of relief, his heart finally at ease, but he remained vigilant about his surroundings. He turned around and headed toward Blackthorn Security Company. Leonardo walked alone on the empty street, his leather shoes making a clear sound as they pounded on the ground. Leonardo's guess was now confirmed. Mrs. Wendy and the others were indeed hallucinating after seeing the bodies in the grocery store. Otherwise, the lights wouldn't have been on inside the store on a street where the electricity hadn't been repaired. And according to Leonardo's observation, there wasn't a horrific incident involving over 100 deaths that had occurred here. His steps toward Blackthorn Security Company suddenly stopped in front of the grocery store. He reached for the slightly ajar wooden door of the grocery store, yanked it open, and the stench of rotting corpses mixed with the smells of food and drinks was extremely pungent. Leonardo covered his nose, walked to the shop owner's body, and reached out to touch it, feeling warmth on his fingertips. Sure enough, he hasn't been dead for long. Leonardo muttered to himself and then began rummaging through the general store. He wanted to perform a spirit medium ritual to communicate directly with the soul of the deceased. Leonardo always felt that this was not a simple suicide. He could tell from the hallucinations the female workers were under that it was a murder, and the real culprit was a Beander. Relying on the substitute wand's ability to withstand fatal attacks, Leonardo boldly began preparing a spirit medium ritual. Generally speaking, the materials needed for the ritual can be purchased at general stores. This is not a secret, and ordinary people often use them to pray to the gods. Therefore, Leonardo effortlessly gathered the materials, scattered them on the ground, and chanted a prayer. The Evernight Goddess, more sublime than cosmos, more enduring than eternity. You are the Lord of Crimson, the Mother of Secrets, the Queen of Calamity and Fear, the Lord of Sleep and Silence. Your devout servant beseeches to watch, beseeches to hear, beseeches to grant a veil of peace. I pray that you will grant me the power to communicate with the souls of the dead. As the sound faded, it was like falling into a tranquil lake. Throughout the entire general store, an invisible force swelled, hovering over the suicidal corpse, seemingly coalescing into an unseen and intangible soul that floated before Leonardo. Leonardo activated spirit vision and saw that a middle-aged man with a thick beard was standing in front of him. His figure was ethereal and floating, as if a gentle breeze would dissipate it. Hurry up, Leonardo asked directly. What was the cause of your death? The soul also spoke slowly, its voice devoid of any emotional fluctuation, like that of an observer. Alcoholism and gambling. I lost all my money at the drinking party, lost my house, and now I have to live in this grocery store. I lost my daughter and wife, they kidnapped them the next day and sold them to who knows where. I endured this hopeless period for half a month, so I chose to commit suicide. What your name? Harvey Roland. The soul vanished silently, and the shop returned to calm, leaving Leonardo alone in the same spot. He felt that Harvey's suicide was sudden. The person was probably most devastated and wanted to take his own life about half a month ago, when he had just lost all his wealth and sold his wife and daughters. Any normal person would choose to commit suicide the next day, rather than half a month later, right? Leonardo thought for a moment and then looked through sandalwood and parchment again. He set sandalwood on fire and wrote on the parchment. The real cause of Harvey Roland's death. 54 Chapter 54 Encounter with Triss. Chapter 54 Encounter with Trissa. Leonardo, who had fallen asleep and entered a dream, saw Tingen bathed in the gentle afternoon sunlight and Harvey sitting in the general store. His beard and hair were obviously unkempt and very messy. His eyes were lifeless and empty. Even when someone came to buy something, he would not look up. Only when a girl passes by outside the shop door will his attention be drawn to her, making him unable to hear anything else, his attention completely focused on the child. The girl with long, fluffy brown hair had a round face and bright eyes. She skipped and hopped down the street, seemingly showing off her windmill toy to the passers-by. The paper windmill spun in the breeze, and passers-by cast tender glances at the girl. Some young men even knelt down and gently stroked her head before going to the general store to buy candy for the lovely girl. Suddenly, Harvey ignored the young man who came to buy candy, grabbed the door, rushed straight at the girl, and grabbed her shoulders with both hands. The girl was frightened and ran away crying. Harvey shook his head inwardly, got up in a daze, put his hands in the pockets of his tattered jacket, and almost bumped into a young woman in the middle of the road. The young woman patted Harvey on the shoulder with a hint of annoyance, then pushed him away. Harvey returned to the grocery store, sat on a stool, and stared blankly at the ceiling until late at night. Then he found a thick hemp rope, tied it to a beam, stepped onto the stool, wrapped the rope around his neck, and pulled hard with both hands, securing the rope completely. Emerging from the dream, Leonardo didn't linger. Slightly flustered, he quickened his pace and headed towards Blackthorn Security Company. At the same time, a fine drizzle began to fall from the sky, wetting his golden hair, shirt, and trousers. But Leonardo didn't turn around. He kept his eyes forward, quickened his pace, and walked straight ahead as if jogging. An ordinary person would naturally not be able to detect the true cause of Harvey Rowland's death, but Leonardo, being a time traveler familiar with the plot, quickly figured out the real culprit behind Harvey's death. Demoness, Trissa. He remembered that in the original story, Trissa used this method of patting people on the shoulder to kill countless ordinary people with a curse, thus completing a dark magic ritual, but was ultimately stopped by Klein and the Nighthawks. Leonardo's previous doubts have finally been answered. Trissa went to great lengths to hallucinate Mrs. Wendy and other female workers so that Leonardo would walk into the trap himself. Perhaps her target was never Harvey, but Leonardo. The more Leonardo thought about it, the more horrified he became, and he quickened his pace. He suddenly remembered the demoness factory worker who had had a relationship with Drake in his study just 2 weeks ago. Trissa knew that Mrs. Wendy and the others were female workers hired by Leonardo because, not long ago, when Leonardo left home to buy sterling silver sheets, the strange female worker who filled the gap and came to work was there. Everything seemed to make sense, and the truth was gradually emerging, but Leonardo dared not think about it too much. He turned from walking to running, his vision blurred by the rain. The whole world seemed to consist only of the pattering rain. Just as he was about to walk out of the street where the power was out and touch the warm yellow light emanating from the gas streetlights, his nose was filled with a pungent, strange fragrance. Leonardo felt a light tap on his shoulder. Smack. The sound wasn't loud, but it was exceptionally jarring, standing out clearly amidst the storm's roar, rain, and gale-force winds. Leonardo immediately turned around, drew his pistol, swung his arm, aimed at darkness behind him, and pulled the trigger sharply. With a bang, the bullet flew into the shadows and disappeared without a trace. There was no sound of it shattering a skull, it simply landed slowly with a clinking sound. Leonardo reached into his pocket again and pulled out a talisman made of tin. This is a lightning charm from the Church of Storms, made of tin. Leonardo infused it with spirituality, flicked his wrist, and the tin sheet drew a beautiful arc in the air, hovering in midair. Electric shock. As Leonardo uttered the incantation, the tin sheet suddenly exploded, and a burst of violent energy scattered in all directions, mixed with silvery white arcs of electricity, crackling in the air and leaping on the raindrops. These electric arcs initially covered only a small area, but with the help of the rain, they rapidly expanded from Leonardo's center, slashing across the walls of the detached houses on both sides and leaving scorch marks. In just a moment, the violent arc of electricity almost destroyed the walls of all the surrounding houses, leaving behind a dense array of marks before finally dissipating completely. In the gap between the detached houses, Trissa slowly emerged from the shadows, her snow-white arms bearing numerous burn marks, and the lace veil of her velvet felt hat had a rather large hole in it. Her eyes darted around, quickly scanning the entire street, but she couldn't spot Leonardo. In the shadow of the street lamp where Leonardo had just stood, only a cane lay silently on the ground, washed by the rain. Trissa gritted her teeth and spat lightly. Having her trap exposed, she planned to leave the scene immediately to avoid being caught by the Nighthawks. But as soon as she turned around, she caught a glimpse of the cane standing up without her noticing. To Trissa's astonishment, the cane bowed in her direction and then suddenly disappeared from the spot, its final posture full of resistance, as if it had been forcibly dragged away by an invisible force. Trissa's lips curved into an alluring smile, and her captivating eyes peered through the curtains toward the direction where the cane had disappeared. This walking stick feels so familiar. Blackthorn Security Company. The rain was gradually intensifying. Dun Smith leaned back in his seat, gazing at the dark night outside the window, a sense of unease creeping into his heart. He slowly got up, walked to the windowsill, opened the window, and let the cold wind, carrying rain, rush into the room and hit his face. At that moment, the unlocked door was kicked open. Captain Dun. Beyonders are committing murders. Dun didn't turn around. He had intended to rely on the voice to identify the other person and improve his memory, but after comparing all the team members in his mind, he found that some of them were unfamiliar. Then he turned around and saw Leonardo Connor, whom he hadn't seen for 2 weeks. Leonardo stood at the doorway, soaking wet. Rain dripped from his sleeves and collar onto the ground, his golden hair was wet, and he leaned wearily against the door frame, hugging himself to keep warm and prevent himself from fainting. A cold wind blew through the open window and blew directly into Leonardo at the doorway, creating a draft that made him shiver. Leonardo then looked up, his azure eyes meeting Dun's with a somewhat dazed expression. Seemingly sensing Leonardo's gaze, Dun didn't turn away, but instead reached behind him to close the window. He raised his hand, clenched it somewhat awkwardly, put it to his mouth, and coughed twice. Mayor Connor, please explain in detail. 55 Chapter 55 Extraordinary Women. Chapter 55 Female Beander, please vote and read on. Because Dun belongs to the sleepless pathway, his vision is enhanced in the darkness environment, so his room is completely dark with the lights off. Therefore, Leonardo didn't look for a sofa. Instead, he stood at the doorway, leaning against the door frame, and told Dun Smith everything that had happened that night, from the strange behavior of Mrs. Wendy and the others to his investigation into the truth. After hearing Leonardo's account, Dun's expression became noticeably tense, and his eyebrows furrowed slightly. He first instructed Leonardo, Mayor Connor, please inform the Nighthawks squad first in the future, and do not act on your own. After saying that, Dun immediately slumped into his chair, fell asleep, and activated his nightmare ability. This caught Leonardo off guard. Just a moment ago the two were talking, but in the blink of an eye, Dun fell into a deep sleep. It seems that Nightmare's ability is very suitable for young people on Earth. Leonardo thought to himself as he took out the Eye of Wisdom and put it on his hand. He knew Dun was going to inform the team members, so Leonardo didn't intend to just sit and wait. If he could copy Nightmare's abilities, he wouldn't have to spend time and effort creating Dream Charm in the future. With the infusion of spirituality, Leonardo's fingertips emitted a vibrant green glow in the dimly lit room. 2 Daffodil Street, Moretti's house. Klein's dream. Klein Moretti sat leisurely in the living room, basking in the gentle afternoon sun. In front of him was a large piece of roast steak and a few slices of toast, while to his left was a cup of Ceylon tea and a copy of Tingen Honest Boy. However, the information in the newspaper was not real news from Tingen City, but rather interesting news from Klein's memory of Earth. He was enjoying his lunch while engrossed in the newspaper. Suddenly, the door was turned on for some reason. It wasn't time for Melissa and Benson to go home yet, and Klein looked at the door warily. Captain Dun? Klein asked in confusion, and when he saw Dun nod at him, he suddenly realized that he was in a dream, and that Dun had used the power of nightmare. Since Captain Dun was promoted to Sequence 6, he has rarely visited my dreams. What is it about this time? Klein was thinking when he heard Dun speak in a short and serious tone. Come to Blackthorn Security Company immediately, there's an urgent mission. As soon as he finished speaking, Dun suddenly disappeared from the spot, leaving Klein completely bewildered. He took one last look at the food he hadn't yet had a chance to enjoy, and with a feeling of reluctance, he exited sleep and returned to the real world. Inside Blackthorn Security Company, Dun slowly awoke from his slumber. He decided to have Klein divine the severity of the situation before considering whether to notify the other team members. When he opened his eyes, Leonardo seemed startled, hurriedly retracting his fingers from midair and hiding them behind his back, looking somewhat disappointed. Why did it fail? This is only the capability of Sequence 7. Is it because I lack the corresponding knowledge? What knowledge do dreams correspond to? Freudian psychoanalysis. Does such a thing exist in this world? After failing the simulation, Leonardo discreetly removed the ring, put it back in his pocket, and calmed his somewhat disappointed mood. Dun broke the silence first. You said you had a conflict with that Beander. What are his abilities? In battles between Beyonders, knowing most of the enemy's Beander abilities in advance will significantly increase the chances of winning and allow for effective control. However, Leonardo didn't want to tell Dun directly that the enemy was a demoness. This was evident from the fact that when Leonardo asked the Nighthawks to protect him from any hyena's assassination attempt, the Nighthawks' records of the demoness were not detailed. So Leonardo simply recited all of Demoness's skills from memory. She can manipulate black flames and frost, can curse others, kill without leaving a trace, and possesses 2 core skills, invisibility, and stand. Dunn astutely picked up on Leonardo's choice of words. Yes, she is a female Beander. Leonardo answered Dunn's question affirmatively, and at the same time, Klein's footsteps gradually came from the corridor. When Klein jogged to the office to report to Dunn, he looked at Leonardo with a surprised expression. Leonardo wasn't surprised. After all, his hair and clothes weren't completely dry, and he looked like a drowned rat, which was bound to attract attention. Ignoring Klein's gaze, Leonardo, who hadn't been to Divination Club in a long time, raised his hand in front of his chest and waved to him. Klein nodded almost imperceptibly, then turned his gaze to Captain Dunn, a hint of drowsiness still lingering in his eyes. "Captain, what urgent mission is it? Do you remember the unusual number of deaths you and Leonard have been investigating these past few days? I think our Mayor Connor was also investigating in secret, and just tonight, he encountered the real culprit and had a fierce battle with him. Can you predict the whereabouts of the murderer?" Dunn methodically and simply conveyed the task to Klein, who, standing at the doorway, thought for a moment before agreeing. "Yes, but I need items related to the murderer and an absolutely quiet environment." Sensing the urgency of the situation, Klein plans to go above the gray fog to divine the killer's whereabouts. Upon hearing Klein's answer, Dunn was caught off guard and glanced at Leonardo, who was standing to the side. Leonardo was startled by the sudden gaze. He had just been planning how to subtly mention to Klein about helping him sell the potion formula, so that he wouldn't have to go to the fortune-telling club to meet Klein tomorrow. If he had to pay for each meeting, it would be too expensive for Leonardo. But he quickly understood what Dunn meant and began to unbutton his shirt from top to bottom in order. Then, under Klein's somewhat disgusted and puzzled gaze, Leonardo took off his wet shirt and handed it to Klein. "She patted my shoulder, and it still carries the scent of her curse." Leonardo's explanation stunned Klein, who almost forgot to accept the cursed shirt. He recalled that during the daytime dream divination, the deceased had all been patted on the shoulder by a woman a few hours before their deaths. Then, Klein suddenly asked, "Was the murderer a woman?" "Yes, you're very smart," Leonardo agreed. Upon hearing this, Klein froze on the spot, her gaze towards Leonardo suddenly filled with reluctance and sympathy. Leonardo watched Klein take his clothes to an empty room, a strange feeling rising in his heart. "Speaking of which, why is Klein looking at me so strangely? My figure doesn't need to make him feel that he should pity me, does it? What on earth is this guy thinking?" Leonardo and Dunn remained silent, but his thoughts kept wandering as he pondered the meaning behind Klein's gaze. Then, he suddenly remembered the scene of his battle with Trissa. "Fuck, I got a tap on the shoulder." 56 Chapter 5D Nightmare. Chapter 56 Simulation Nightmare. Dunn thoughtfully lit the fireplace for Leonardo, and the chill on Leonardo was completely dispelled by the time Klein returned to the office. "I got the result from the divination. In my dream, I saw a 2-story gray-blue house. All the windows on the first floor were closed and the curtains were drawn. The soil within several meters around it was dark brown, with no grass or flowers growing. It also had a dilapidated and gloomy garden, just like the kind often seen in ghost stories. The only symbol that can identify its location is a river, a rather wide river, located not far from it. It could be the Tussock River or the Hoy River. We can only search by searching. Hopefully, it's not too late." Klein shared the results of her divination with the two of them. As soon as he finished stating his results, Dunn and Leonardo both fell into deep thought. Leonardo vaguely remembered that in the original book, Klein and the others had fought Trissa in the West End, but it couldn't be said directly, so Leonardo could only hint at it to the two indirectly. "Have you considered that the other party might be performing some kind of ritual?" "What ceremony?" Klein asked, puzzled, while Dunn also turned to look at him. "What we know is that all the bizarre deaths have one thing in common: they all died 1 to 2 weeks in advance. People who are about to die or have a desire to die can hide themselves well and make the death seem ordinary in order to accomplish some purpose in secret. I think that for such planned and purposeful criminals, the initial target would definitely be far away from the area where the altar is located, which stems from the instinct to seek safety. He will only consider the nearby areas once there are only a few dying people left in other areas, making them harder to find. Therefore, we should review the data again and filter out the areas where the number of deaths was at a normal level in the initial stage but has risen rapidly in the past few days." After Leonardo finished speaking, he looked at the two men with expectant eyes, hoping that Klein and Dunn would understand the clues in his words. Klein's eyes lit up. It was rare for him to praise Leonardo. Great reasoning. At this moment, Dunn also picked up the documents and carefully reviewed them, while Leonardo was somewhat anxious, not knowing when Trissa would curse him. Just like when he faced Anihina, he was shot dead by Leonardo before she could cast her curse on him. This feeling of having your life constantly threatened is really unpleasant, Leonardo thought, as he heard Dunn slowly speak. There is indeed such an area, and there is only one. Leonardo cast an expectant look at Dunn, hoping he would tell him the exact location. The west side, Dunn said definitively. Klein immediately suggested that he didn't want to lose Mr. Tower for the time being, since the latter provided him with 2 pages of the Roussel's diary every week. Let's start by checking the southwest corner of the west area. That area isn't very big. Okay. Dunn agreed. Just as Leonardo, wearing his damped shirt again, and Klein were about to step out of the door together, Dunn suddenly stopped them. Klein, go to Channy's gate and have Leonard retrieve a sealed artifact. Dunn first instructed Klein, who had been a full member for over a month and had a good understanding of the sealed artifact behind Channy's gate. Therefore, Dunn chose to trust Klein's judgment and let him take charge of the selection. Captain, shouldn't we draft a report first? Klein habitually stopped and turned around to ask. No, it's not necessary. After Dunn finished speaking, Klein quickly went downstairs, leaving only Leonardo and Dunn behind. Dunn also got up at this moment, preparing to leave the door, but stopped at the door entrance and almost bumped into Leonardo, who was following behind him. Ah, Mayor Connor. Leonardo, who was extremely anxious, immediately interrupted Dunn. I'll go with you and resolve this matter as soon as possible. Dunn was unaware that Trissa had patted Leonardo on the shoulder, but Leonardo was too preoccupied to explain, his mind solely focused on dealing with Trissa as quickly as possible. The two quickly arrived at the Blackthorn Security Company building and boarded the company's private carriage. Klein also arrived quickly with the sealed artifact. Upon seeing Klein arrive, Dunn quickly instructed him to drive the carriage, while he took the sealed artifact from Klein and sat opposite Leonardo. Can Klein drive a carriage? Wait, what is this? Leonardo was joking to himself when his gaze fell on the sealed artifact in Dunn's hand. It was a thick, stiff blood vessel. 2-105, blood thief. Leonardo quickly recalled the name and codename of the sealed artifact and suspected it was a coincidence created by 008. Seemingly noticing Leonardo's gaze, Dunn began to explain. This is a sealed artifact. Wake me up in 20 minutes. As soon as he finished speaking, Dunn fell asleep again, holding Blood Thief in his arms, which made Leonardo feel a little strange. However, the carriage began to lurch and sway under Klein's less than skilled driving, while Dunn remained motionless, immersed in his dream. Leonardo, who was awake, was clearly not feeling well and was trying to maintain his balance. This guy is worse than me driving the carriage, Leonardo thought, taking out his eye of wisdom again, his fingertips glowing green. After a long while, the emerald green gem suddenly turned into an ink-black color, which greatly surprised Leonardo. He couldn't wait to infuse it with spirituality and enter the dream. The carriage was traveling in the middle of the northern district. Leonardo, lost in his dream, found himself in a verdant field. With a single thought, he reached the edge of the field, where the grass beneath his feet was no longer a vast, empty expanse of illusion. Immediately afterwards, Leonardo, following his memory, simulated the entire Howard Street in his dream and found his home. He saw Drake lying on the bed in the guest room on the first floor, and then plunged into the other's dream. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself in a dense forest, where Drake, dressed in hunter's outfit, was excitedly chasing a wild deer, luring it into his trap. Upon seeing Leonardo appear, Drake exclaimed in surprise. Get Gao Wen and bring him to the West District immediately. I need help. As soon as he finished speaking, Leonardo's figure vanished instantly, returning to the real world. Dunn was still asleep, but he had used Eye of Wisdom many times today, which made him feel his brain spinning wildly at high speed, unable to stop. Leonardo quickly removed the Eye of Wisdom and put it back in his pocket. Only then did his brain stop its intense thinking and return to normal, leaving only fatigue. The rain gradually subsided, with only a few raindrops occasionally falling and sliding into the carriage through the window. Leonardo glanced at Dunn, who was holding the Blood Thief, and silently calculated the time in his mind. 15 minutes. He thought to himself that Nightmare's ability was quite impressive, and that in a world where letter writing was the mainstream form of communication, Nightmare might be a valuable skill. At this moment, the carriage finally came to a smooth stop. Klein jumped off and shouted into the carriage. Captain, we've arrived. 57 Chapter 57 Battle. Chapter 57 Battle. Dunn exited the dream, and Leonardo jumped off the carriage. It was already late at night, and the city was very quiet. The houses on both sides of the street had drawn their curtains and turned off their lights. The heavy dark clouds had not yet dissipated, and only the streetlights on both sides of the street cast a dim yellow glow, which was reflected on the puddles of various sizes on the road, forming reflections. The three of them stepped over one puddle of varying depths after another. Klein suddenly stopped, his eyes catching sight of a gray-blue two-story building. He immediately turned his head and pointed in the direction. Due to insufficient lighting and the fact that it was not a sleepless pathway, Klein could not distinguish it and had to leave it to Dunn to confirm. The tussock river was deep and dark, and the clouds obscured the crimson moon, making the two-story gray-blue house look like a monster hidden in the shadows. The garden in front of the small building was extremely quiet, without a sound, as if there were no reptiles or life. Yes, this is it. Dunn lowered his voice, making sure only Leonardo and Klein could hear. Immediately, he gestured for Leonardo to step back and spoke again. Mayor Connor, you are in charge of monitoring the surrounding area and do not go near that house. Leonardo obediently stopped. He immediately realized that Trissa had cursed him, and if she suddenly discovered this, he would likely be used as a scapegoat by Trissa. Then Leonardo watched as Klein and Dunn, carrying the sealed artifact, slowly blended into darkness and cautiously approached the second floor of the gray-blue house, inside the unlit bedroom. A young woman with a round face and a sweet, gentle demeanor sat in front of her dressing table, studying the complex science of panel care under the dim starlight. Next to her right was a silver mirror, its surface so rough that it barely reflected her image. Suddenly, a bloody stain appeared on the silver mirror. The gentle and sweet Trissa's expression immediately turned serious. She stood up, walked to the window, and silently looked outside. Outside the glass window, the garden was overgrown with vines, dilapidated and gloomy, the river flowed darkly, reflecting starlight, while the nearby houses radiated a warm and cozy glow. Everything was extremely quiet, with only the patter of rain in my ears. She pushed open the window, which had no railings, and saw Klein standing in the garden at her feet, holding a revolver and warily observing his surroundings. She took a breath and fell like a feather, landing silently on the lawn. Trissa silently approached Fry, circled behind Klein, and suddenly found himself holding a dagger painted with black paint. Puff! She moved with lightning speed, plunging the dagger into Klein's lower back in an instant. But at that moment, what she saw suddenly shattered, as if it were an illusion. She saw outside the wall not only Klein, wearing a half-high silk hat, but also Dunn Smith beside him, with his eyes closed, his brow pressed, and his body half bent over, as if invisible ripples were spreading out around him. Further away, four dark figures were rapidly approaching them. Trissa's pupils contracted, and she suddenly realized that she had fallen into a dream. Before she could react, Klein downstairs pulled the trigger, and the bullet shattered the glass window with perfect accuracy, sending shards flying everywhere. Bang bang bang. Klein didn't stop firing until he had emptied all the bullets in the magazine, and then prepared to reload. Dunn also woke up, his gray eyes sweeping over the shattered windows on the second floor and over every room. Click. Trissa's figure suddenly shattered like a mirror. Trissa, who dodged the bullets using the mirror substitution technique, quickly turned around, ran downstairs, and arrived on the first floor. Inside this floor, a relentless, chilling wind seemed to freeze one to the bone, and invisible, transparent figures wandered aimlessly and numbly in every corner. Having lost her invisibility, Trissa's body temperature dropped slightly with each of these ghostly figures she passed through. By the time she finally reached the altar, she was shivering uncontrollably. The altar was a round table with a statue of a deity carved from white bones placed in the center. The statue is the size of a normal adult male's head, with only a vague outline of its eyebrows and eyes, suggesting it is an exceptionally beautiful woman. Her hair stretched from her head to her ankles, each strand distinct and thick, like venomous snakes or tentacles. And at the tip of each hair, there is an eye, sometimes closed, sometimes open, densely packed together. Around this eerie statue were numerous puppets, crudely made, each bearing a name and corresponding information, such as Leonardo Connor. There were 3 candles on the round table, their dim, greenish flames flickering in the cold, howling wind. Trissa bowed to the statue and began chanting incantations rapidly. Then she pushed Puppet aside, extinguished the candle, and picked up the idol. The wind suddenly became fierce, causing the tightly closed windows to shake violently. Clang, crash, glass shattered, and a cold, lifeless wind blew in all directions. Klein, who had just chased into the house, suddenly felt his blood turning cold and his dashboard gradually frost over. Just then, his ankle tightened, as if it were being firmly gripped by something invisible. Klein immediately shouted towards the outside. "Captain, I'm being entangled by the wraith here." Seeing this, Leonardo couldn't help but feel a little worried. Qing actually dared to barge into Trissa's house. As a support player without any offensive capabilities, he was extremely vulnerable when facing direct attacks from his opponent. Leonardo was about to rush into the house to rescue Qing using the substitute wand when he saw Dun standing there, half bent over, muttering in an ancient language that Leonardo couldn't understand. This language could be dragon language, or it could be an even more ancient cipher. Immediately afterwards, the air around Dun suddenly became still, even the raindrops slowed down, and a dark swamp seemed to be expanding around him, enveloping the entire villa and including Leonardo. Leonardo felt his mind and body suddenly become calm. He almost gave up the idea of saving Qing and just wanted to stand there and listen to Dun chant the cipher. Immediately afterwards, the eerie wind emanating from the first floor of the villa subsided, and the invisible, transparent figures ceased their frenzy, sinking into the murky darkness as if into the embrace of Mother. Qing also successfully broke free from Wraith's control, rolling around and moving away from the house, the gradually freezing feeling inside her body gradually disappearing. At the same time, two Nighthawk's figures were getting closer and closer at the street corner. One of them is Seika Tian, whom Leonardo often sees, from Sequence 8's Midnight Poet. The other person had a fair complexion as if they hadn't seen the sun in a long time. They were in their 30s, with black hair, blue eyes, a high nose bridge, thin lips, and a cold and gloomy demeanor. Leonardo quickly recognized the man's identity. Corpse Collector, Fry. 58 Chapter 58 Casting, Nightmare. Chapter 58 Unleashing, Nightmare, please vote. Please continue reading. Whenever the sun sets in the west, dewdrops adorned the hem of dusk. Her bare face was as pale as the moonlight, or like the stars that accompany the moon. Evening primroses, nourished by the night dew. It blossomed with elegant, delicate flowers. Avoid the sunlight like a hermit. As soon as Seika arrived on the battlefield, he immediately began chanting. Complementing Dun's soul-soothing ability, all the wraiths in the gray-blue house fell completely silent at the same time, sinking into the quagmire. Leonardo immediately focused his mind to prevent the two's abilities from causing him to become so engrossed in thought that he could not concentrate. Fry darted through the shadows, quickly approaching and bursting into the gray-blue house while Dun and Seika were still under the effect of tranquility. At the altar on the first floor, Trissa's movements gradually slowed down under the influence of Midnight Poet and Soul Assurer. Facing Fry, who broke into the room again, Trissa did not hesitate for a moment, and black, scorching flames gathered in his palm. She raised one hand high and threw it with all her might. The flames hit Fry with perfect accuracy, but she dodged them nimbly and the flames hit the wooden floor, bursting into flames. At that moment, her gaze passed through the door and landed on a blonde figure standing at the farthest point, outside the courtyard. It's him. Trissa's eyes lit up. She immediately guessed that the guy standing at the far end watching the game was Leonardo Connor, the mayor of Tingen City. So, black flames and ice alternately condensed in her palms, attacking Fry inside the room. At the same time, she focused her mind to resist the influence of soul-soothing, rolled into the shadows, her figure light and graceful, her snow-white skin slowly merging into the shadows and disappearing. She moved swiftly in the shadows, appearing from time to time in the thorn bushes outside the house, then under the streetlights, and finally came to Leonardo's back, a dagger materializing in her hand. Trissa's gaze sharpened, and before Leonardo could turn around, she plunged the dagger into his waist. She was incredibly fast, her movements fluid and seamless, giving the Nighthawks almost no time to react. Go to hell. Trissa clenched her teeth and growled in a low voice. Click. The dagger pierced Leonardo's waist, his fingertips emitting a faint blackish-purple light. Just as Trissa thought she had succeeded, his entire body suddenly shattered, turning into a silver mirror that crumbled into fragments scattered everywhere. Mirror substitution. There was no blood splattering as expected, only fragments scattered all over the ground. Trissa recognized this as her own Deander ability. Her heart sank, and she gripped the black dagger tightly, taking a step back to blend back into the shadows. The next second, Leonardo suddenly appeared behind her, his revolver pressed against the back of Trissa's head, and he pulled the trigger sharply. Bang! The moment the gunshot rang out, Trissa quickly crouched down, turned around and kicked Leonardo's revolver away. He then swung his arm, using his assassin ability to concentrate all his strength into his arm, and the dagger pierced through again with precision. The movement was extremely swift. Leonardo had no time to react before the dagger pierced his waist, and blood trickled out. Trissa rolled over again, pulled out a dagger, and pressed it against Leonardo's neck as he knelt in agony. She looked around warily, but could no longer see any of the Nighthawks. Before them lay in endless darkness, the gray-blue houses vanished into thin air, leaving only her and Leonardo in the world. Leonardo knelt on the ground in pain, clutching his waist, but a faint smile appeared on his lips. Click. The dream shattered. Trissa stood under a street lamp, unaware that she had somehow fallen into the nightmare. Meanwhile, Dun and 3 other Nighthawks had surrounded her. Leonardo walked slowly out from a distance, the ring on his finger gleaming with a deep darkness before transforming back into a vibrant green gemstone. When Trissa prepared to take Leonardo hostage, she had already unknowingly fallen into the nightmare spell cast by Leonardo. Superior. At Dun's command, Klein, Sika, and Fry rushed toward Trissa from different directions. All 3 men were holding revolvers and fired at Trissa almost simultaneously. Bang bang bang. Bullets streaked across the night sky, whistling as they tore through the air, raining down with precision. Just as Trissa was powerless to resist and preparing to meet her death, seemingly invisible threads appeared in the air, binding Klein and the others in midair and slowing their movements. In Trissa's vision, one rose-like black flame after another rushed towards her, blocking the bullets. Boom! Black flames and bullets vibrated in the air, igniting the air and causing the surrounding temperature to rise sharply. The puddles of varying depths on the road surface gradually evaporated, and white mist rose. A graceful figure slowly landed in front of Trissa. She exclaimed in surprise, "Mother!" The figure did not answer, but slowly turned its head. Its figure was very alluring under the dim streetlights, with brown hair and brown eyes, and a beautiful face. The figure turned its head, its gaze fixed on the misty distance ahead. She raised her hand, intending to continue manipulating the silk threads, but the threads broke invisibly in midair. Immediately afterwards, as if the threads had been taken away, they turned around and wrapped around the 2 of them, binding them tightly. Under the shocked gaze of the woman whom Trissa called Mother, the white-haired Sika suddenly rushed into the white mist, the black muzzle of her gun filling most of the woman's vision. At the same time, Sika's eyes had somehow become dark and deep. She opened her mouth, and without moving her Adam's apple, she resonated purely with the surrounding air through her own spirituality, producing a faint, ethereal, and strange sound. Her flowers bloomed all night until dawn. But when daylight opens its eyes, I was so ashamed of being stared at that I had nowhere to hide. She withered and died in a fit of dizziness. Bound all over with silk threads, Trissa seemed to lose all will to live in an instant. She lowered her head, and her long black hair slowly fell to the ground. The woman known as Mother was clearly unaffected. She exhaled a chilling breath, and a layer of crystalline and solid frost appeared on her body from the inside out, resisting the bullets. She immediately raised her long, fair left leg high and kicked Sika hard in front of her. Upon feeling the impact, Sika immediately crossed her arms to protect herself, but the enormous shock still made her hands numb. The woman was surrounded by 7 black flames, which shot towards Sika's retreating direction like bullets. Sika's body was still suspended in midair, making it difficult to dodge effectively. Suddenly, countless threads attacked from behind her, tightly binding her and pulling her back to Dun's side. When she looked up, Dun's left hand was frozen in midair, his fingers moving very nimbly, and at his fingertips were those invisible threads. Dun's right hand was holding the thick, scarlet blood vessel, its surface tinged with a deep purple. At the same time, a gust of wind blew by, dispersing the white mist that filled the street, and the figures of Trissa and the woman slowly emerged. It was only then that Leonardo realized the identity of the woman Trissa referred to as Mother. Sharon Hoy. Sequence 6, Demonstration of Pleasure. 59 Chapter 5 ends. Chapter 59, Battle ends. The thick, dark clouds were blown away by a gust of wind, and the moon peeked out, casting its veil of light over crimson. In the middle of the street, Sharon Hoy grabbed Trissa from behind and used the mirror substitute technique. The 2 shattered like a mirror and disappeared, leaving only shards of glass on the ground, making a soft sound. Klein, Sika, and Fry quickly stepped forward, intending to split up and search for clues, when they heard Dun's voice from behind. His voice was noticeably hoarse. Leonardo turned his head to look at Dun and noticed that the wrinkles on the other man's face had increased considerably. No need to chase after them. Our main objective is to disrupt the ritual. Sika, Klein, you 2 take care of the follow-up to the mission. Fry, take me back to Blackthorn Security Company. This sealed artifact should be returned. After giving his orders swiftly and decisively, Dun glanced back at Leonardo, his gaze lingering on Leonardo's fingertips. He didn't directly mention that Leonardo owned a mystical item, but simply nodded slightly in thanks before getting into a carriage with Fry's help and returning to the Blackthorn Security Company. Since Klein had participated in the entire battle and was now very tired, Sika kindly told Klein to rest where he was and went into the gray-blue house alone. Klein crouched down against the wall, panting heavily. His spirituality was nearly exhausted, and his ears were filled with insane ramblings. He felt dizzy and disoriented. After confirming that Sika, Dunn, and Fry had all gone far away, Leonardo slowly approached Klein, ready to talk to him about his recent sale of potion formula. He first chuckled, but then noticed that Klein seemed to be in a bad state. He was clutching his head and ears, his eyes were wide open, and his expression was contorted in pain. Is this about to get out of control? Stop kidding me. Leonardo sighed inwardly, his expression turning tense as he raised his finger, revealing the emerald green gem. He began frantically recalling in his mind what Sika and Dunn looked like when they sang the psalms. Leonardo only spoke slowly when the emerald green gemstone turned jet black. His voice seemed to merge with the air in an invisible way, carrying a calming and relaxing quality. Ah, the threat of fear, Crimson's hope. At least one thing is true, this life is fleeting. One thing is true, the rest are lies. After blooming once, it will depart from this world. His chanting was like a lullaby, its faint echoes reverberating through the empty streets and lingering under the moonlight of crimson. After hearing Leonardo's chanting, Klein seemed to see the tranquil moonlight and the peaceful, gently rippling lake. His condition improved significantly, the frantic babbling in his ears gradually subsided, and his eyelids began to grow heavy, as if he could fall asleep at any moment. Finally, exhausted from the battle and aided by Leonardo's chanting, Klein fell into a deep sleep. Leonardo looked at the sleeping Klein and, instead of waking him, sat down beside him, oblivious to the mud, letting Klein lean on his shoulder. At the same time, Leonardo slowly fell asleep, and the emerald in the eye of wisdom once again shone with a deep darkness. Leonardo entered Klein's dream, seized the door, and saw Klein's new home at 2 Daffodil Street, which Klein had recently moved into. Here, he saw Klein enjoying dinner happily with Benson and Melissa, the warm yellow light inside softening the chill of the moonlight in Crimson's room. When Benson and Melissa saw Leonardo arrive, they were taken aback at first, but then quickly stood up and bowed to Leonardo, this impolite visitor. Leonardo nodded slightly in response to the two, a faint smile playing on his lips. He called Klein out and handed him a note. The text on the note was in simplified Chinese, but under Leonardo's control over the dream, Klein subconsciously believed it was Loan language. Leonardo handed the note to the other person, smiled, waved goodbye to the three of them. Goodbye, everyone. I hope the three of you can live happily together forever. Back in the real world, Leonardo opened his eyes to find Drake and Gawain standing there. They didn't wake Leonardo, instead, they stood beside him, shielding him from the streetlights with their own bodies, and stood with their hands clasped behind their backs. Leonardo slowly got up, looked at Drake, and then pointed to Klein, who was sleeping against the wall. Take him home to 2 Daffodil Street. Leonardo gave the brief instructions and then looked at Gawain. How are Mrs. Wendy and the others? Gawain was taken aback at first. As a Sequence 7, he could clearly sense traces of a battle between Beyonders. However, today was his first day as Mayor Connor's bodyguard, and he had failed to arrive immediately, causing a dereliction of duty. The more he thought about it, the more ashamed he felt, but he still answered Leonardo's question with clean and concise words. They are in much better condition after you used the spell to put them to sleep. There is no cleaning work today. Drake let the female workers go home early to rest. Mayor Connor, it was my dereliction of duty not to protect you closely. After Gao Wen finished speaking, he bowed deeply. Leonardo reassured Gawain in a relaxed tone. It's all right, Mr. Gawain. I'm not that fragile, am I? Besides, I've had a very fruitful day. Today I witnessed more than 10 Beyonder abilities and successfully simulated Nightmare and Midnight Poet, while also observing the use of Blood Thief up close. Leonardo added in his heart, with delight. Gawain was completely bewildered by Leonardo's answer. He didn't say anything more, but simply stood beside Leonardo, responding with silence. It was past midnight, and with a recent downpour, there wasn't a single public carriage to be seen on the streets. Fortunately, Drake's physique had improved since becoming the hunter, and he easily carried Klein on his back as he headed towards Daffodil Street. Leonardo, supported by Gawain, slowly walked towards Howard Street. 2 Daffodil Street, Moretti's house. The sun hangs directly above Tingen City, casting a golden glow that outlines the buildings with shimmering gold edges. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. Klein felt very relaxed after a night's sleep. He got out of bed and went into the bathroom. Looking at the strange yet familiar face in the mirror, Klein was still recalling the dream from last night. He clearly remembered that Leonardo had slipped him a note, which read as follows. We can start looking for leads on the purchase of the potion formula for Sequence 8. I hope our future cooperation will be very pleasant. Klein's mind wasn't on this at all. Even though he hadn't discovered it in his dream last night, Klein could still tell after waking up that Leonardo had used Nightmare's power on him last night. He recalled the battle of the previous night, how Leonardo had used the nightmare ability in front of everyone, and how he had sung poems to him to lull him to sleep, which belonged to the midnight poet. Could Leonardo be Beander of Pathway, feasibly +1? That's almost impossible. How could he have advanced to sequence 7 so quickly? This guy has so many secrets. As Klein reflected on this, she recalled that Leonardo seemed to possess many potion formulas and was able to provide her with a fixed amount of 2 pages of Russell's diary every week. The most crucial element among these is prophecy. Immediately afterwards, his thoughts returned to last night's dream, settling on the note Leonardo had handed him. He suddenly realized a problem. He noticed that the text on the note was in simplified Chinese. Klein was suddenly overwhelmed with a complex mix of emotions, shock, doubt, and a faint sense of anticipation. Before he could even leave the restroom, Klein rushed to above the gray fog, intending to perform a divination. He had just taken out his pendulum when he suddenly shook his head and laughed. How is this possible? The probability of time travel happening should be 1 in 10 million or even 1 in 10 million. Moreover, even if he really is a time traveler, and comes from Earth like me, that's something I can't determine through divination. Klein put the pendulum back, her smile freezing on her lips, a hint of disappointment in her expression. 60 Chaptergas. Chapter 60 Kilangos. A week passed in the blink of an eye, and Monday afternoon arrived. Leonardo was in his study, waiting for the fool Klein to pull him into above the gray fog to attend the tarot club. During this time, Leonardo constantly played the role of student of ratiocination, obtaining several case files from Inspector Toll. With his improved reasoning skills, he successfully found the key to the case, helping the police department apprehend criminal, and the potion also began to take effect. Now, with nothing else to do, Leonardo has officially begun preparing to create the words of filth charm. He knew that blood thief came from marauder. Pathways sequence 6 inches Prometheus, so during this time, aside from deducing cases, Leonardo has been studying various principles to successfully simulate. Gentle sunlight streamed through the arched window, casting dappled shadows on the tabletop. Beside Leonardo lies the magic mirror, which Selena used for divination and which had been corrupted by the true creator. On the other side are a few thin pieces of black iron. Leonardo put on the 2081, Eye of Wisdom, and quickly recalled the scene when Dunsmith used the blood thief during his confrontation with Sharon. He then combined this scene with the knowledge he had recently read, creating friction in a chemical reaction in his mind. The gemstone on the ring changed from emerald green to deep red. At the same time, the air in the study seemed to freeze suddenly, and the spirituality around Eye of Wisdom seemed to form an invisible vortex. Leonardo's eyes changed from azure blue to deep red, carrying a certain eeriness. He swiftly guided his spirituality, like an invisible hand, covering the shattered magic mirror. In an instant, Leonardo heard frantic babbling in his ears, and a feeling of dizziness washed over him. Through the broken mirror, Leonardo saw himself reflected in it. In the mirror, Leonardo Connor's lips curled into a smile, his eyes turned a deep crimson, and a flame seemed to burn within his pupils, sending a chill down one's spine. He was hanging upside down, arms outstretched, bound to a huge cross. He saw the veins and bulges on his arm bulging out, as if they had turned into writhing, thick venomous snakes. Bang! The magic mirror suddenly shattered, glass shards piercing the carpet and walls, breaking through Leonardo's panel, and blood flowed out. Beneath his bulging veins and arms, tiny, light black specks of light slowly emerged, like fireflies in the darkness, ethereal and floating, seemingly about to vanish at any moment. Leonardo focused his mind, fighting against the maddening incoherent babbling while suppressing the stinging pain coursing through his body. He made a grasping motion in midair, as if he had caught the faint black specks of light, and with his other hand he picked up the thin sheet of black iron, combined the two, and pressed them firmly onto the table. Those light black dots struggled constantly, as if they were about to break through Leonardo's suppression. Although they looked illusory and transparent, they possessed a power that was beyond the reach of ordinary people. Leonardo even stood up and used all his strength to press the two substances firmly against the table until they gradually combined. The illusory black mist rose up, transforming into a sky constantly streaked with lightning, against an extremely dense and dark background. All of this vanished quickly from Leonardo's sight, and a dark iron talisman appeared on the table, covered with numerous symbols, magical markings, eerie patterns, and twisted numbers. The frantic babbling gradually subsided, replaced by the ticking of a clock, and the bulging veins and bulges on his arms gradually returned to normal. Leonardo reached out and picked up the talisman, feeling as if it sealed away a madman who kept screaming. This should count as a success. Leonardo murmured, setting filth as the activation spell. After finishing all this, Leonardo leaned back in his chair, exhausted, and drifted off to sleep, getting a short rest. It wasn't until the clock struck 3 in the afternoon, and until the deep red light and layers of gray mist appeared before his eyes, that Leonardo finally mustered his energy to prepare for the tarot gathering. A magnificent palace rose from the ground, the bronze table and 22 high-backed chairs remained silent as always, and the gray mist beneath their feet remained unchanged, flowing slowly. It wasn't until all the members had arrived that Leonardo noticed there was a new member beside him, in addition to the hanged man Alger. The new member's face was obscured by the gray mist and could not be seen clearly, but judging from his figure and condition, he should be a young boy with a simple personality. Behind him, on the high-backed chair, stars symbolizing the sun were constantly being arranged and combined. Little son, Derek Berg. Leonardo quickly guessed the identity, muttering to himself, looks like Klein has been promoted to Sequence 8. He's already closed the deal, otherwise he would never have risked bringing in a new member. After submitting the 2-page Russell's diary for the week, the fool Klein began reading, while the other members lowered their heads, waiting for the signal to tap 3 fingers on the long table. Unlike usual, Leonardo could clearly feel that the hanged man Alger, sitting to his left, was trembling slightly for some reason and was constantly glancing at him out of the corner of his eye. Justice Audrey, sitting opposite, clearly noticed this and began to analyze it in her mind, acting as a spectator. Wow, another new member has joined. Mr. Fool hasn't introduced the new member yet. I wonder which tower card he will choose as his symbol. But judging from his physique, he should be young and simple-minded. No, Audrey, you are a spectator. You need to be objective. You can't assume someone is naive just because they are a young boy. In Backland, in East Borough, many very young children are already stealing, or even helping gangs. After giving himself a mental warning, Audrey walked past Leonardo and turned his gaze to the hanged man Alger. Hanged man seems very unsettled, which is unlike his usual self. Is he afraid? No, it's more like shock. I think, hanged man must have encountered something truly shocking this week, something that has terrified him. But this is the Tarot Club. Mr. Hanged Man shouldn't be here looking so shocked. What happened to him must have been terrifying, causing him to suffer from a serious mental illness. Sailors who are at sea and cannot return to the mainland for a long time are prone to mental problems. Audrey smiled, feeling quite pleased with her analysis, but quickly realized she had to play the role of spectator. She immediately stopped smiling, calmed herself down, and repeatedly reminded herself of this role. Leonardo saw all of this. It has to be said that the members of the Tarot Club are all very interesting, and even in real life, they are people worth getting to know better. Thinking of this, Leonardo's gaze suddenly drifted to the last seat, and he remembered the owner of this bronze high-backed chair in the original book. The World Gehrman Sparrow. If I ever encounter Klein, who is using the identity of Gehrman, when I go to sea in the future, I will absolutely not pay any attention to him unless he contacts me first. Who knows if Klein, in order to perfectly portray Gehrman and maintain his crazy persona, might do something strange to me. Amidst a flurry of thoughts, Klein tapped the long table 3 times with his fingers, signaling that everyone could begin their conversation. He spoke first, giving a grand introduction of little son to everyone, after which the hanged man Alger spoke before anyone else. His tone was filled with utmost respect, and his voice trembled slightly. Mr. Tower, do you remember your previous prophecy? You said that a pirate admiral would soon fall in Backland. Sir, I request that you provide me with the other party's name. I will offer you generous compensation, and I will do my best to fulfill any conditions you set. Is the pirate admiral you prophesied called Qilangos? As soon as Alger finished speaking, Audrey on the other end let out a slight hiss. She quickly recalled Mr. Tower's earlier prophecy in her mind, murmuring the name repeatedly. Qilangos. 61 Chapterite Transaction. Chapter 61 Tripartite Transaction. The hanged man Alger cast an expectant glance, just as Audrey eagerly awaited Leonardo's answer. The fool Klein subtly raised his eyes to look at Leonardo, while, little son, Derek's gaze was filled with doubt. Qilangos. And the prophecy that Mr. Hanged Man just mentioned, but Mr. Tower doesn't look very old, yet he has the ability to make prophecies. Mr. Fool is indeed a profound and unfathomable powerhouse, no, a god. Feeling everyone's gaze, Leonardo leaned back in his chair and adopted a charlatan's tone. No, Mr. Hanged Man, my prophecy is only vague. I have difficulty obtaining more accurate information. Unfortunately, I have no way of knowing the name of the pirate admiral. As soon as Leonardo finished speaking, the hanged man Alger looked visibly disappointed. Justice Audrey was about to look away when Leonardo spoke again. But I know his title. Leonardo paused, Then, after confirming that he was once again the center of attention, added, "Hurricane Admiral." As soon as he finished speaking, the hanged man Alger's pupils contracted sharply, his mouth gaped open, and then, as if realizing something, he quickly apologized to Leonardo. "Mr. Tower, please forgive my previous pride." Leonardo smiled, not paying much attention, and didn't give any answer, just nodding slightly. Justice Audrey, sitting opposite, suddenly spoke up. Instead of asking Mr. Tower directly, she turned to the hanged man. "Hanged man, how did you obtain this information? Also, could you explain the meaning of Pirate Admiral to me? I am willing to pay for it." Driven by her boundless curiosity, Audrey completely forgot about playing the spectator, her mind filled with wondrous fantasies about the world of Beander. Since Mr. Tower had said that the Pirate Admiral would perish in Backland, and she herself was in Backland. As Justice Audrey drifted into aimless reverie, the hanged man Alger slowly began to speak. "No, this requires no payment, Miss Justice. I remember you're in Backland, and I hope to work with you." "What kind of collaboration?" Audrey's interest grew even stronger. "I want you to help me find the whereabouts of Hurricane General Qilangos. As for what happens next, you don't need to take any risks. At the same time, I will pay you extra compensation." "Okay." Audrey agreed with great delight, not at all like a spectator. After becoming a Beander, what's the thing she wants to do most? Of course, it's to meet those figures who previously only existed in aristocratic legends. Soon, Audrey realized she had lost her composure and quickly calmed herself down, repeatedly reminding herself how to play the role of a true spectator. In addition, he is also the Sequence 6 Beander, Wind Blessed, of the Sailor Pathway, and also possesses a mystical item, also known as a sealed artifact. "He is quite cunning and cruel, so don't try to deal with him," Alger solemnly explained. At this point, he suddenly turned his head and looked at Leonardo, saying, "Mr. Tower, may I ask you for some assistance?" Upon hearing this, Leonardo immediately shook his head, refusing Alger's request, and looked up at the head of the table. "Hey, Mr. Hanged Man, aren't we surrounded by something far more powerful?" Leonardo countered with a question, gesturing for Alger to look at Klein at the head of the table. "My identity is too sensitive, and I cannot enter Backland for the time being. I think you can seek help from Mr. Fool's blessed men. I believe that Mr. Fool's blessed men are also very powerful, no less than Qilangos of Sequence 6. Quote. Upon hearing Leonardo's opinion, the hanged man Alger suddenly realized that he had somewhat underestimated the Fool's existence. He looked at Klein with a start, bowed slightly, and expressed his apology. "Mr. Fool, may I ask your blessed one to help at a critical moment? I will pay whatever price you are interested in." Hearing this, Klein suppressed the urge to twitch his lips. He didn't possess the powerful blessed abilities Leonard had described, but if he directly refused Alger's request, it might discourage Mr. Hanged Man and diminish his motivation to continue searching for the Roussel's diary. After considering his words for a few moments, Klein glanced at Leonardo, who was smiling, before speaking. "The premise is that my blessed happens to be in Backland." "All right." Alger looked away with some disappointment after being rejected by two strong individuals. With the Qilangos matter settled, Justice Audrey was next to speak up. After calming down, she offered to buy the telepathos formula. At this moment, Leonardo slowly answered, "I have it here, and I can give it to you right now." "Very well, I'm willing to pay £900 as payment. Mr. Tower, or what would you like me to do?" As soon as Audrey spoke, she suddenly felt a pang of regret and shame. In her mind, how could Mr. Tower, who possessed such powerful, prophetic abilities, possibly be interested in £900? If you want to impress Mr. Tower with money, you'd probably have to offer up an entire estate in East Cheshire. "No, Miss Justice, gold pounds aren't of much use to me," Leonardo replied somewhat reluctantly, then changed the subject to his terms. "I need the two beyond ingredients, the Yeti's brain core and the library Shadow Spirit's crystalline structure. This is the Savon potion formula, and also the pathway Leonard chose for Elizabeth." At the same time, Leonardo's gaze swept over Alger and Derek. "If you obtain these Beander ingredients, you can exchange them for gold pounds from Miss Justice." After the three nodded in acknowledgement, Leonardo looked at Klein, who was watching the show, and made a pious request. "Mr. Fool, could you please manifest the telepathos formula for me?" Klein responded softly, then materialized the recipe Leonardo had been repeating in his mind and handed it to Miss Justice. Audrey quickly skimmed through the notes several times, and after confirming that she had completely memorized them, she thanked Leonardo. After that, little son, Derek also revealed his own deal. "I want sequence 9 of the sun, pathway and the bard potion formula. He mimicked the mannerisms of the hanged man in justice, adding, "I can pay you," Derek said hesitantly. This time, Leonardo didn't rush to answer Derek. He felt that revealing too much about the sequence formula would lower his status. Although his prediction came true and greatly shocked everyone in the Tarot Club, Leonardo decided to enrich his character and make him feel more real. So Alger and Derek made a deal. Alger would find the bard potion formula for Derek. The deal for Little Sun, Derek was also successfully completed. He looked around with joy and anticipation, thinking that Tarot Club was truly a magical place. Seeing that everyone's deals had been finalized, Leonardo suddenly turned his head and looked at the hanged man Alger. "Mr. Hanged Man, are you interested in a deal? I can pay you right now," Alger asked in return, somewhat puzzled. "What transaction?" "I got the Wind-Blessed potion formula." 62 Chapter Changes. Chapter 62 Unexpected Turn of Events. Please vote. Wind-Blessed. Alger and Audrey both gasped simultaneously. This marks the first time since Tarot Club's inception that it has been involved in transactions outside of sequence. What surprised everyone the most was that Mr. Tower actually sold 2 bottles of potion formula at this gathering, and this certainly wasn't all of Mr. Tower's formula reserves. Audrey was astonished to believe that Mr. Tower must have a powerful backer, which would have enabled him to obtain these formulas so easily. At the same time, she was also somewhat delighted, feeling that she could purchase Sequence 7, Sequence 6, or even Sequence 5 below demigod level from Mr. Tower. In the world of Beyonder, Beyonders like her who had comprehended the acting method lacked not time, but a more advanced formula. The experienced Alger quickly calmed himself down. He had already concluded that Tower was a demigod level powerhouse, or at the very least, a Sequence 5 below demigod level. Alger didn't dare to delay and quickly responded. "Mr. Tower, your formula reserves are truly amazing. What would you like me to do for you?" Alger did not propose a normal exchange, because in his view, none of the items he had were of interest to Mr. Tower. Leonardo looked at Alger and thought he was very sensible. He also remembered that Alger had once provided him with the Beyond ingredient for free. However, he was still some time away from being promoted to Sequence 7 and didn't have an urgent need for the Beyond ingredient. Leonardo decided not to waste this valuable opportunity and do the hanged man a favor. "I haven't thought it through yet. I'll state my conditions within the next month. If not, then forget it." "Forget it?" Alger was both surprised and suspicious. "That's right. If I haven't decided on the mystical item or the Beyond ingredient I want in the next month, which is 30 days, then our deal is off, and the Wind-Blessed recipe will be given to you as a gift." Leonardo's eloquent explanation nearly shook Alger's faith in the god of storms. He quickly began to praise Leonardo. "You are truly a generous and powerful being." Leonardo did not respond. With Klein's help, he materialized the Wind-Blessed recipe and handed it over to Alger. After a brief exchange, this week's Tarot Club officially ended, and Leonardo returned to the real world to begin his reflections. "My prediction has finally come true, and my current value is indispensable to a startup like Tarot Club. Now Alger and Audrey subconsciously seek my help with the potion formula, and my persona makes me seem very generous, so there's nothing to regret. After all, I acquire the potion formula painlessly, as long as Klein is willing to respond to my secret ritual. He has no reason not to respond to me. After all, this is a necessary factor in the growth of Tarot Club." Leonardo was thinking when he suddenly felt great. He casually picked up the Words of Filth on the table, and his eyes suddenly sharpened. It should be mid-August now. If I remember correctly, after Keelangos is killed by Mr. Azek, Megos will, by a coincidence, go to Blackthorn Security Company in 008. The biggest concern now is unforeseen changes. My appearance has indeed caused many changes to Ins Zangwil's plans, making it difficult for them to continue. He can only rely on 008 to create coincidences. The resentment in the factory district is gradually decreasing, and the workers' lives are striding towards a happy door. Dunsmith has successfully advanced to Sequence 6 and mastered the acting method. All that is needed now is to stop him from adhering to traditional behavior and consuming the Beyonder characteristic left behind by his deceased teammate, causing him to go a little mad, which would completely destroy Ins Zangwil's plan. Member John Maynard's relationship with Sharon Hoy is currently at a freezing point, but I stopped Triss's curse ritual last time and almost killed her. I'm just worried that Mrs. Sharon might target me and make an example of me. Sigh, the biggest problem right now is that I'm too weak. I have absolutely no chance against Beyonders of mid-sequence and above." Leonardo gathered his thoughts, put down the Words of Filth, picked up the case file, and began to play the role of student of ratiocination. A house with a lush green lawn on the outskirts of Tingen. It has gardens that begin to wither in mid-August and dark red chimneys. Behind the bedroom window in this house is a desk with an ordinary notebook spread out on it. A slightly pale hand turned the notebook to the first page, and then quickly flipped through it again. Amidst the rustling of paper, lines of text faintly appeared. John Maynard's ambition led him to covet the mayor's position and plot to assassinate the current mayor, Leonardo Connor. The mission was successful, and Annie Hina successfully got close to Leonardo Connor. However, what is puzzling is that, without sufficient reason, Annie Hina made a rare mistake, and Leonardo Connor miraculously survived. But it had little impact on Ince Zangwill's plans. The struggle between John Maynard and Viscount Constance Howard, and between the new party and the Conservative Party, intensified. The Conservative Party nobles increased taxes in their regions, while the new party factory owners similarly increased their oppression of the workers. After Leonardo Connor survived, his personality changed. He began to improve the difficult situation of the workers, promoted the passage of the Basic Workers' Protection Act, and established the Charity Foundation. What is most incomprehensible is John Maynard's transformation, which can be described as a huge change in personality. He seemed to have realized that Sharon Hoy had cast some kind of charm on him. How could Demoness's charm fail? After discovering part of the truth, John Maynard actually began to distance himself from Sharon Hoy, preventing her from getting close to him, and instead joined Leonardo Connor's camp to serve him. After the Lenevis steel fraud, John Maynard was surprisingly generous in returning the money to the victims, quelling public resentment. Hinia's Vincent student Selina Wood secretly learned how to use the magic mirror for divination and prayed to the true creator. That same night, Leonardo Connor, who was invited to a birthday dinner, resolved the situation and saved Selina Wood. The whereabouts of the magic mirror are unknown. Nighthawks player Klein Moretti was also present. He keenly noticed the unusual activity upstairs and reported it to Dunn Smith. The incident was successfully resolved by Leonardo. Dunn Smith did not pursue the matter further, which was not part of Ince Zangwill's plan. Dunn also did not enter Heinz Vincent's dream while investigating him, did not look directly at the true creator, and was not corrupted by him. When Trissa was first promoted to Sequence 7, she infiltrated the ranks of the Connor house's hired maids at Sharon Hoy's behest and had a relationship with the servant Drake. However, Leonardo Connor seemed to notice something was wrong with Trissa afterward, forbade Drake from seeing her again, and fired Trissa directly. Trissa was punished by Sharon Hoy for failing her mission. Harboring resentment, she decided to include Leonardo Connor as a victim in her curse ritual. She started with the factory worker, Mrs. Wendy, and successfully lured Leonardo to investigate the truth, leading him into her ambush. During the battle, Leonardo Connor, despite being at a disadvantage, suddenly disappeared. Fortunately, Trissa had already planted a curse and decided to kill him from a distance. Leonardo Connor actually went directly to Blackthorn Security Company to seek help from Dunn Smith and the Nighthawks, and successfully disrupted Trissa's curse ritual, nearly killing him. Sharon Hoy intervened just in time and rescued Trissa. In the second battle, Leonardo Connor actually used the ability of Nightmare, which clearly shows that he possesses a powerful sealed artifact. But Leonardo Connor's presence doesn't seem to affect the development of the story. The biggest twist in the story is that Dunn Smith suddenly grasped the acting method and successfully advanced to Sequence 6. Before Dunn Smith began playing Nightmare, he entered Leonardo Connor's dream to find out more about him. After that, Dunn Smith began to effectively play the role of Nightmare, frequently entering other people's dreams. No, Leonardo Connor's presence is subtly influencing the ending of the story. He established a workers' protection system to improve workers' quality of life and happiness, which led to a gradual decrease in resentment in the factory district. He reminded John Maynard to distance himself from Sharon Hoy and, in John Maynard's name, established the Charity Foundation to subsidize the poor. He attended Selina Wood's birthday dinner and seemed to have planned ahead for the magic mirror divination incident, indirectly preventing Dunn Smith from being corrupted. He broke free from Dunn Smith's control over the dream and, in turn, guided him to comprehend the acting method, successfully digest the potion, and advance to Sequence 6. He sensed Trissa's cursed ritual and engaged in direct combat with it. Leonardo, who should have faced death again, escaped using special means and even joined forces with the Nighthawks to nearly kill Trissa. The quill pen broke free from the control of my pale fingers and began to write on its own. Leonardo Connor seems to have known about Ince Zangwill's plan all along. He is dismantling and destroying Ince Zangwill's plan step by step. Ince Zangwill is furious about this. He decided to use a coincidence to completely eliminate Leonardo Connor. 63 chapters on female worker. Chapter 63, the missing female worker. Parliament proceeded as scheduled on Tuesday morning. The parliament had just ended when Leonardo was suddenly stopped by John Maynard and pulled aside to a corner. He looked extremely flustered, his eyes were sunken, his cheeks had lost their usual roundness, and his eyes were bloodshot. Leonardo noticed that John's physical condition seemed unhealthy lately. He was always holding his lower back, and after walking only a few steps, he would stop to catch his breath, with cold sweat on his forehead. Mayor Connor, John began, glancing around before clearing his throat twice. I think I probably won't be attending Parliament anytime soon. As you can see, my health isn't very good. I think I need some time to rest, and I hope to get your permission. Leonardo, who already didn't have a very good impression of John, didn't inquire about John's health and simply nodded in response. Okay, you can rest anytime if you need to. Just have your secretary take the parliamentary minutes in your place. After Leonardo finished speaking, he turned and left, patted John on the shoulder, and walked out of City Hall. John remained where he was, watching Leonardo's departing figure, wanting to chase after him and say something, but he stopped in his tracks. Leonardo boarded a public carriage, his mind preoccupied with his role as student of ratiocination, and contemplating the case, paying no attention to John's body. He believes that big capitalists like John value their lives much more than ordinary people, and if they have health problems, they will definitely seek the best medical resources. Leonardo is a reader pathway and doesn't have the pharmaceutical capabilities of Beander, so he doesn't want to offer help. Back home, Leonardo had just pushed open the door when he saw Klein Moretti in his living room, training in combat with Gawain. After bowing and greeting Klein, Leonardo went straight upstairs to the study. On the desk in the study were several new cases sent by Inspector Toll. On the evening of August 7, a female worker mysteriously disappeared on her way home, and her whereabouts remain unknown to this day. Her name is Circe. Leonardo murmured the contents of the dossier. He vaguely remembered the female worker named Circe. She was also an employee of Connor House. If he thought about it carefully, she was the female worker who was absent due to illness and replaced by Trissa. Circe was also the first female worker to notice the grocery store owner's suicide on the night of the Trissa curse ritual. Thinking of this, Leonardo rang the bell on the table, and his servant Drake pushed open the door and came to Leonardo. Leonardo reached out and pushed the file aside, tapping his finger twice on the name before asking. Do we have a female employee named Circe? Yes, sir, she missed one before because she was sick. Drake's gaze suddenly shifted as he said this. Ignoring Drake's gaze, Leonardo continued asking questions, his hands crossed and resting on the table. Is she still coming? No, sir, ever since she was subjected to the hallucination, her body seems to be getting weaker and sicker, and she has been absent for almost a week. Following your previous instructions, I contacted Congressman John Maynard and applied to the Charity Foundation for assistance for her. So sensible. Leonardo silently praised her before lowering his voice and giving instructions. Actually, she wasn't sick, she just went missing. She never came home after that night. Do you know any detailed information about her? Leonardo paused suddenly, then thought of Klein downstairs. Yeah, with Seer here, why bother having others investigate? Just let Klein handle it. Why not just use dream divination? Drake was about to leave the door to gather basic information about Circe when Leonardo suddenly stopped him. Go downstairs and invite the trainee inspector who was practicing sparring with Mr. Gao when up here. Yes. Drake gave a soft reply and left the study. Before long, Klein appeared before Leonardo. Mayor Connor. Klein had just finished his combat training and was covered in sweat, looking far from presentable. Leonardo looked at the other person with a smile and pushed the file toward Klein. Klein, you're a trainee inspector, solving cases should be your job, right? I need you to use the dream divination method to tell me the detailed information about this female worker. Klein glanced at Leonardo, then looked down at the description in the dossier. Okay. Klein agreed without hesitation. Since this was just a divination for an ordinary person, not for the beyond case, Klein didn't need to come to above the gray fog to assist. He quickly fell into a deep sleep and then woke up just as soon as possible. The whole process took less than a minute. Seeing Klein's skillful use of divination, Leonardo became even more convinced that the other had completely digested the potion of Sequence 9. However, judging from Klein's continued fatigue after combat training, Leonardo speculates that Klein has not yet advanced to Sequence 8. After he finished his divination, I took out the clown potion formula. Klein's voice interrupted Leonardo's thoughts. My divination is over. Circe, the female worker, has a younger brother who is about the same age as her, less than 3 years apart. Her parents died early, and her younger brother, James, is currently studying law at Hoi University. His tuition and living expenses are mostly covered by his sister Cersei. Cersei's life is very simple. She is very thin and saves all the good things for her younger brother. She works in a textile factory during the day and comes to your house to clean at night. She and her brother James have a very good relationship, and there's a kind of affection between them that goes beyond kinship. After Klein finished speaking, she hesitated, but ultimately restrained herself and described in detail what she had seen to Leonardo, which, in short, was a relationship between an older woman and a younger man. Having seen so many of the original owner's memories, Leonardo was already used to this kind of scene. After listening to Klein's description, Leonardo nodded without blushing or skipping a beat. "Thank you, Klein. This is a gift for you." Leonardo pulled out a banknote and quickly wrote the potion formula for Clown. "This is sequence 8 feet Clown, of the Seer pathway. I think you'll need it sooner or later." In fact, Leonardo didn't think that the formula he provided could help Klein in any way. Judging from Klein's way of doing things, he probably already had his own Clown potion formula prepared long ago. Klein thanked Leonardo without any emotional fluctuation, then turned around as if remembering something. "Mayor Connor, someone has recently been seeking Beast Tamer's potion formula. He's asking for 800 pounds. I wonder if you're interested, or if you have the right recipe." 800 pounds. Leonardo imagined this huge sum of money in his mind. Having transmigrated to this era, he is far from wealthy. Even if they sold the potion formula, they had already switched to other beyond ingredients and hadn't saved any money. "Klein, I must say, your efficiency has exceeded my expectations. I'll write it down for you now." No, I'll go with you." 64 Chapter Underground Trading Market. Chapter 64 Underground Trading Market. Late at night, Leonardo, after a simple disguise, arrived at Evil Dragon Bar with Klein. By this time, the sun had begun to set, and the twilight glow bathed all the houses. Inside the Evil Dragon Bar, the boxing and dog and mouse matches were warming up. Passing through the billiards room and through a series of rooms, Leonardo followed Klein into the underground trading market. As Leonardo entered the bar, he glanced around and saw a pale-faced young man wearing a tattered linen shirt and blue-gray trousers typical of the working class. His eyes were unfocused yet filled with madness as he muttered something incessantly. "Monster, admissal," Leonardo muttered to himself, recalling the descriptions of the boy in his mind. After confirming that the other party had no more details, he lowered his head, pulled his hat brim down, and followed Klein into the underground trading market. The room on the left is for lending and repaying, while the room on the right is where valuable items are sold and acquired, including the beyond ingredient, Klein explained thoughtfully. Then, the two of them stood outside the door and waited until the people in front of them left. Only then did Leonardo, led by others, enter the room on the right. He opened the door and went into the inner room, where a kerosene lamp was lit. He locked the door, sat down in the customer's chair, and looked at the elderly man wearing a black soft hat opposite him, saying, "I heard you're acquiring Beast Tamer's potion formula." The old man had sagging cheek muscles and deep wrinkles around his eyes, but he was quite burly. When he heard Leonardo's name, he visibly looked up, his dull eyes showing confusion. In the old man's opinion, it was unlikely that a young guy like Leonardo would have a potion formula with sequence 8. The old man took a sip of mead with some skepticism and said, "That's right, the acquisition price was 800 pounds. No problem." Leonardo asked for paper and pen and wrote down the recipe for Beast Tamer from memory in detail. The old man took the recipe from Leonardo, his cloudy eyes quickly scanning it, and when he looked up at Leonardo again, there was a hint of barely perceptible shock in his eyes. Immediately afterwards, the old man took out paper and pen, quickly wrote something down, and handed it to Leonardo, instructing him as follows. "Take this paper and go next door to get the money." Is it really that simple? Leonardo instinctively had some doubts. He didn't know how the old man could distinguish between genuine and fake formulas. At the same time, as it was Leonardo's first time making a secret deal with Beander, he felt that the program was too simple. Just like when he first went to Blackthorn Security Company to make a deal. Leonardo still got up and left the room. Before leaving, he turned around, intending to ask the old man if there was any information about purchasing the formula, but after thinking it over, he finally gave up. A common man is innocent, but possessing a treasure is a crime. Leonardo recalled a story from Earth. You should not blindly display your value in front of strangers you do not trust, otherwise you may bring disaster upon yourself. Leonardo then quickly left the room and entered the room on the left. Here was a burly, drunk man who, after receiving the slip of paper with the old man's handwriting, deftly produced $800 gold pounds. Throughout the entire process, Leonardo was completely bewildered. But as he caressed the gold pounds in his hands, his worries and anxieties were quickly forgotten. After leaving the exchange, Leonardo met up with Klein, who had purchased other materials. Leonardo took out a gold pound and handed it to Klein. "This is our agreement, Klein. Thank you for your generosity." Klein accepted it without batting an eye. After the transaction was completed and both of their needs were met, they were about to leave when they ran into Old Neil, who was rushing over at the door. Old Neil spotted Klein first and immediately went up to greet him. "Hey, Klein, you got here way before me." He didn't seem to recognize Leonardo in disguise, he simply glanced at him and smiled. "Klein, who is this?" Leonardo had no intention of hiding his identity from Old Neil. He remembered that Old Neil had helped him concoct his first potion, and with gratitude, Leonardo bowed respectfully to Old Neil, lowering his voice to ensure that only the three of them could hear. "Mr. Old Neil, don't you remember me? I am Leonardo Connor, you once protected me." "Oh, it's you, Mayor Connor. Your protection of the grassroots is a testament to your finest character," Old Neil said, seemingly realizing who it was, then rose slightly, maintaining his smile throughout. "Alas, I'm getting old, and my memory isn't very good." As the three exchanged pleasantries, a burly man reeking of alcohol and wearing a naval officer's uniform walked up behind them and found Old Neil and Klein. His expression was serious, as if he had encountered a problem. He glanced warily at Leonardo, then at Old Neil and Klein. "Hee, Swain, don't worry about it. This gentleman is a good friend of ours and a trustworthy partner." Old Neil explained to Swain, without mentioning Leonardo's identity, then turned to Leonardo and introduced him. "This is Swain, the owner of Evil Dragon Bar. He's a very nice guy." Leonardo nodded slightly in acknowledgement. Swain seemed to trust Old Neil a lot, so he didn't care that Leonardo was present and lowered his voice to say, "I need your help." "What happened?" Old Neil's tone turned serious. With his messy brown hair and a strong smell of alcohol, Swain replied in a deep voice. "A member of the mandated Punishers squad has gone out of control nearby. We must take him down before he can harm ordinary people." Out of control. Leonardo's heart skipped a beat, and he almost blurted out the question. He naturally understood the meaning of losing control, but he had never actually seen it. Only in his dreams had he been punished by the Evernight goddess and seen himself being shot dead by Dun after losing control. Now, this is the first time he has truly faced a loss of control, so it's understandable that he's a little nervous. He had experienced battles between Beyonders, but those Beyonders still retained their humanity. But those who went out of control were different. Out of control Beyonders would attack everyone around them in a frenzy, losing their humanity, like Demon. Leonardo's thoughts wandered aimlessly, and Klein was visibly nervous, while Old Neil, seemingly experienced many similar situations, calmly responded. "Where are the out-of-control individuals? What did they need us to do?" "Be my support." Swain gave a brief reply, without explaining why things had gone out of control or where the person was, and quickly walked away into the distance. Leonardo instinctively tried to follow, but Klein stopped him. Klein, speaking in a lecturing tone and in a low voice, said, "Mayor Connor, dealing with out-of-control incidents is the Nighthawk's mission. I'm sorry, I can't take you home." Leonardo, of course, understood Klein's implied meaning. He didn't want to participate in the Beyonder battle. However, Leonardo confidently overtook Klein, jogging to catch up with Old Neil and Swain, leaving Klein with a long silhouette against the setting sun. It's not just you Nighthawks who have a responsibility to protect Tingen. 65 Chapter of Control. Chapter 65 The Out of Control. Thump thump thump. Leonardo, Klein, and Old Neil followed Swain across the road and into the actual dock district. On that ship, Swain slowed his pace and pointed to an inland river cargo ship moored not far away. 2 mandated Punishers are on board dealing with that out-of-control guy and preventing him from entering the Tussock River. You help me influence him and control him. Leave the rest to me. Old Neil gasped for breath, as if working a bellows, and said, "Okay, but you need to give me a minute, a minute to get back to normal." Swain nodded, said nothing more, and rushed onto the cargo ship to join the battle. This cargo ship bears obvious signs of its time. Although it is powered by steam and has an extra chimney, it still retains the masts, sails, and other features of the past. Moreover, it has a metal hull, with some parts made of steel and many parts still made of wood. The sounds of fighting grew increasingly intense. Klein and Old Neil were looking for an entrance to the cabin when they suddenly heard a loud crashing sound mixed with a cracking noise. The side of the wooden cabin cracked instantly, sending spikes flying, and a figure tumbled out, crashing into the ship's side. Leonardo ignored the figure's injuries, his gaze fixed entirely on Monster, who was rushing toward the rift. This monster was over 1.8 meters tall, wearing a tattered shirt and trousers. Its exposed areas were covered with dark green scales, and the gaps between its hands and feet were covered with skin, resembling the webbed feet of some aquatic animals. It has a wrinkled head, from which one can vaguely make out a human shape, and slime is flowing from its scales, constantly dripping down. Sizzle. The dark green slime slightly corroded the deck, leaving distinct marks. At the same time, old Neil, standing beside him, pulled out a slumber charm. He calmed his breathing, his eyes fixed on the cabin, ready to throw it at any moment. The monster suddenly looked toward the shore, and as if stimulated by something, it frantically broke free from the control of Vesson and the others, and leapt into the river. Oh no, he's broken free. Swain was knocked back several steps by Monster's powerful punch. His heart sank, but his body was embedded in the cabin wall and he could not break free for a short time. The monster in the water suddenly became like a seasoned hunter, dodging attacks from the surface with remarkable agility. Bang bang bang. Klein stood beside old Neil and Leonardo, holding a gun in one hand and a cane in the other, frantically pulling the trigger. The bullets flew into the water at high speed, lost their kinetic energy instantly, and could only create splashes, making it difficult to hit the target. The monster formed a dark shadow beneath the water's surface and was rapidly approaching old Neil, Leonardo, and the others. In order to better observe the battle and determine the timing for using Slumber Charm, old Neil unconsciously moved towards the shore. At this moment, facing the monster's rapid advance, old Neil was still exhausted and it would be difficult for him to return to a safe area in a short time. What's going on? How can the out-of-control Beander still be attacking with a target? Leonardo sensed something was amiss. He pulled out the Eye of Wisdom, held it between his fingers, and prepared for battle. Swain broke free from the cabin and leapt into the icy river. However, the shadowy figure was incredibly fast. As soon as Swain entered the river, the shadowy figure suddenly leapt high into the air. The glow of the setting sun shone down, reflecting off the monster's scale-covered body, making it gleam. Just as old Neil was about to infuse the talisman with spiritual energy, a pebble suddenly appeared on the flat ground, tripping him and interrupting the infusion. Old Neil. Swain poked his head out of the river and shouted loudly. The monster's shadow had completely enveloped Old Neil. Old Neil collapsed to the ground, his eyes filled with terror. Klein quickly turned his gun and fired, but the bullet only sparked when it hit the scales and bounced off, failing to cause any effective damage. Klein's heart tightened. Suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed that the emerald on Leonardo's fingertip had been stained black. Leonardo took 2 steps back, leaned against the wall of the dock district house, and fell into a deep sleep. At the same time, his azure eyes gleamed with a dark light, and his pupils seemed to sparkle with starlight in the dead of night. As Klein was momentarily stunned, he suddenly felt that the surrounding environment and things were becoming unreal. In his vision, the monster flew into the air, its fingers already transformed into sharp claws. It gathered its strength and grabbed heavily at old Neil, who was lying on the ground. No, old Neil. Klein's heart tightened, and he hurriedly spoke up to warn him, but he missed the best opportunity. In his shocked and desperate eyes, old Neil had already been torn to pieces by the monster, leaving blood everywhere. He immediately turned his head, only to find that Leonardo had fallen asleep at some point. After tearing old Neil apart, the monster immediately locked its gaze on Leonardo, its muscles bulging, and it extended its sharp claws to pounce on Leonardo. A deep fear gripped Klein, the air was thick with the acrid smell of blood. At that moment, only one thought remained in his mind. Run, run. Just as Klein was about to run away, he heard Leonardo's agonizing screams as he was torn apart behind him. When he stopped and looked back, he was so horrified by the bloody scene that he almost collapsed to the ground. Familiar faces and figures were torn apart, leaving blood and flesh fragments scattered on the ground. Swain, who was about to rush in to end the fight, had just raised his fist when a bloody gash was slashed open on his neck. He clutched his neck, powerless to resist, and collapsed to the ground in pain. Without hesitation, Klein fled backward, his eyes tightly shut, the scene of his companions being torn apart vivid in his mind. Behind them came painful wails and the deep roar of the monster. Klein ran frantically into the distance, only to crash into an invisible wall of air. When he turned his head again, the monster's claws were already hanging above his head, ready to kill him at any moment. No, don't. Klein drew his pistol, and before he could aim, he immediately pulled the trigger, emptying the magazine. The bullets hit Monster, extinguished the sparks, and caused no damage whatsoever. Click. Suddenly, the scene before me shattered like a mirror. The illusory floating sensation vanished instantly. When Klein opened his eyes again, he found himself lying on the ground, fast asleep. Old Neil, Wesson, and others also fell into a deep sleep. The monster that the out-of-control Beander had transformed into lay limp on the ground. There was a bloody bullet wound on its temple. The afterglow of the setting sun spilled onto the river, scattering golden fragments. When Klein turned his head to look, Leonardo, who had been lying on the ground in a deep sleep, was nowhere to be seen. A gentle breeze swept across the sea, billowing the sails. As the sun sank below the horizon, only the fiery red twilight remained in the sky. Klein instinctively pulled out a coin and flicked it high into the air. He murmured, "Leonardo Connor used the ability, Nightmare, on me." 66 Mental pollution. The sun had completely sunk below the horizon, and Leonardo walked wearily down the dimly lit street. He clutched his head in agony, hearing frantic babbling in his ears. Just now, Leonardo made a fatal mistake. He used the Nightmare Beander ability from Simulation 2081 to pull Klein, Old Neil, and the out-of-control monster into the dream world. In the dream, Leonardo unexpectedly encountered an upside-down giant and an eye behind a shadowy veil. For some reason, as if some external force was interfering, Leonardo stared directly at the giant. Immediately afterwards, he heard a series of maddening, mentally agonizing murmurs. Damn it, how could I be so stupid as to drag the out-of-control person into the dream? And the one who lost control was clearly Sailor. Why am I seeing something like Hanged Man on the pathway? Leonardo focused his mind, fighting off the insane ramblings to avoid losing control. Even as doubts flooded in, Leonardo was unable to think. Once he tried to think and activate his brain, his insane ramblings would intensify. Leonardo had no choice but to quickly return home. He had come up with a solution: he could pray to the fool Klein. The secret ritual grants Klein the ability to influence the real world, thus helping Leonardo break free from his delirium. As night fell and Tingen City was shrouded in the moonlight of crimson, Leonardo finally returned home. His obviously abnormal state attracted the attention of Gawain and Drake. Seeing Leonardo's pained appearance, the experienced Gawain immediately put down his newspaper and looked at Leonardo with vigilance. Leonardo unusually didn't greet the two of them and went straight to the study on the second floor. "What's wrong with Mr. Leonardo?" Drake, who knew little about the Beander world, asked with concern. Gawain's gaze remained wary as he kept a close eye on Leonardo's retreating figure until he disappeared around the corner of the stairs. "He is in danger now," Gawain said in a deep voice, picked up his weapon, and followed Leonardo to the door of the study. A tense atmosphere filled the room, and Drake involuntarily followed Gawain, the two of them standing together outside the study. Gawain pressed his ear against the door, his body slightly bent, assuming a fighting stance. His eyes suddenly turned golden. "I named Leonardo Connor's house my jurisdiction." Inside the study, Leonardo locked himself in and focused intently, battling his delirious ramblings. He quickly rummaged through the leather, found a pen and ink, and swiftly began to carve various occultism symbols, among which the eye without pupils and the twisted lines were particularly eye-catching. Leonardo's fingers were trembling slightly, making it difficult for him to write out the complete symbols. After doing all this, Leonardo first placed the leather on a lit candle, then found a knife and, disregarding the pain, made a cut on his palm, drawing blood. He then covered the leather with one hand and smeared the blood on it. He kept muttering the same thing over and over again. "A fool who does not belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who holds the key to good fortune. Great Mr. Fool, I have been mentally corrupted in a battle with the out-of-control Beander. Please save me, help me fight off these insane ramblings." Klein sat above the gray fog, where the deep red stars shone brightly from the high-backed chair that symbolized the tower. He tapped his finger lightly in midair and saw Leonardo, who was enduring incoherent mutterings and looking pained. Klein quickly recalled the out-of-control Beander he had faced at dusk that day. Without any hesitation, he immediately used his spirituality to draw the gray fog to flow, and then pulled Leonardo into above the gray fog. A magnificent palace appeared before Leonardo's eyes, and he saw himself sitting on a bronze high-backed chair and lying on a bronze long table. At the same time, the insane babbling that kept ringing in my ears gradually faded away until it disappeared. But when he closes his eyes and listens carefully, he can still hear the murmurs echoing deep in his mind. Klein, shrouded in gray fog and his figure blurred, remained silent, looking at Leonardo with a hint of anxiety in his heart. Seeing that Leonardo's condition was gradually stabilizing, Klein finally spoke. "Why were you contaminated?" Upon hearing Klein speak, Leonardo recounted the scene he had witnessed in the dream of the out-of-control person at dusk. Tonight, my friends and I went to confront an out-of-control, mandated punisher. Since the out-of-control one threatened my friend's life, I used Nightmare's power to pull the out-of-control one into my dream. At this point, Leonardo began to feel an overwhelming sense of fear. I saw it in that out-of-control person's dream, I saw it. The hanged giant and the eyes behind the curtain of shadows. Mr. Fool, do you have any way to stop this delirium? This time was different. Leonardo was sincerely seeking help from the fool Qing again. He didn't want things to get out of control. Leonardo always felt that the reason he was contaminated this time must have been due to external interference. Otherwise, he would never have made such a wrong decision. Qing remained silent, but inwardly anxious, his fingers tapping lightly on the long table, producing dull, resounding thuds that echoed above the gray fog. His mind raced through all the materials he had read, including Russell's diary and the history of occultism provided by Little Sun, but he still couldn't find a solution. Leonardo sat at the long bronze table, knowing the solution. In the original book, Qing had used mystical items, such as the Sun Brooch, to help the Tarot Club members resist delirium and negative influences. But Qing doesn't have that ability right now. Just as the two fell into a deathly silence, Qing, sitting at the head of the table, suddenly spoke. Would you be willing to cooperate with me and give it a try? After some deliberation, Qing still felt that Mr. Tower's existence was more important than his maintaining a high position. Furthermore, Leonardo's mental corruption was precisely in order to save old Neil. Leonardo immediately cast an expectant glance his way. How do we do it? Close your eyes now, silently recite my name in your heart, and radiate your spirituality. Leonardo nodded and quickly did as instructed. He closed his eyes tightly, constantly chanting the name of Qing, while simultaneously channeling his spirituality into countless threads that radiated outwards. During the time he closed his eyes and could not see, Qing simultaneously stirred up a vast gray mist, intertwining it with Leonardo's spirit, attempting to plant the gray mist within Leonardo's body to help him isolate himself from delirium for an extended period. The unchanging gray mist began to flow faster, forming a vortex centered on Leonardo, frantically absorbing the surrounding spirituality and its own energy. The pained expression on Leonardo's face gradually eased until it disappeared. Qing took a deep breath and said, "All right." When Leonardo opened his eyes again, he was sitting in an armchair, back in the real world. The babbling has disappeared. Leonardo was both surprised and delighted. He looked at the setting collection that he had hidden under the table and felt a pang of sadness. I feel like I'm nowhere near as good as Qing's magic touch. However, the disappearance of the delirium does not mean that the pollution has been cleaned up. Although this can be counteracted through a long-term acting method, I will have to be more careful in the future. He sighed inwardly, while at the same time, a feeling of hunger swept over his entire body. You need to eat well to have the energy to think. Having made his decision, Leonardo got up and opened the door, only to see Drake and Gawain standing outside, ready to fight at any moment. In just a moment of eye contact, Leonardo understood why the two were standing outside his door. So he switched to his usual gentle and reassuring tone. I'm fine now. 67 ordinary days. After dinner, Leonardo returned to his study and began to think about the various oddities that had occurred during the battle that day. In the original book, Qing did indeed confront an out-of-control, mandated punisher, alongside old Neil. But it's clearly different from today. In the original story, the out-of-control person was constantly fighting Swain head-on. Old Neil and Qing, as his support, used the slumber charm to help Swain control the out-of-control person, and the two of them stayed in a relatively safe area. This time it was different. First, the out-of-control creature rushed to the shore and towards old Neil, while old Neil, unusually, moved closer to the river and stood on the bank, a place the out-of-control creature could easily attack. Even so, given old Neil's and Swain's experience, they would never allow old Neil to be put in danger. Even if old Neil wasn't in a relatively safe place, he would still throw out the talisman at the right time. Old Neil fell down, but the ground there was perfectly flat, with no deep pits. Old Neil was standing there perfectly fine, so why did he fall? Leonardo reconstructed the scene of the battle in his mind, seemingly grasping the key point of the problem, and his azure eyes suddenly lit up. The first Beander who was knocked away by the out-of-control creature crashed onto the ship's side not far from old Neil. His impact sent pebbles flying, which rolled to old Neil's feet without him noticing, ultimately causing him to slip and fall while throwing the talisman, putting him in danger. What a coincidence. When the coincidence was mentioned, Leonardo immediately thought of 008, and then recalled why he made the decision to make a mistake, casting Nightmare to pull the out-of-control person into a dream. Could it be that 008 is controlling all of this? Its target isn't old Neil, but me. This also seems to explain why I saw the hanging giant in Beander's dream in the sailor pathway. 008, or rather, since Zhangwil hoped to use the hanged giant to mentally corrupt me, causing me to lose control and die at the hands of the Nighthawks. The more Leonardo thought about it, the more his pores swelled, and the more terrifying he felt it became. But how do you explain that Count Hall made me Audrey's occultism teacher? My previous conclusion was that 008 wrote me into the story, but I wasn't a key part. I was just an insignificant supporting character who was only responsible for driving the plot forward. Now it seems that this is not the case. I've probably already been labeled an enemy by Ince Zhangwil. After reaching a conclusion, Leonardo retrieved the words of filth that he had previously hidden, intending to carry them with him all day in case of an emergency. Also, from now on, you'll have to carry a substitute wand with you whenever you leave the door. Leonardo sorted out his thoughts and prepared a response. He's not the kind of guy who gives up when faced with difficulties. This time I prayed to Klein, asking him to use the gray fog to help me shut down my delirium and get rid of the risk of losing control. This is an absolutely inexplicable coincidence in 008's eyes. So I must be prepared to face formidable enemies at any time from now on. In fact, at first he only wanted to indirectly influence Ince Zhangwil's plans from the sidelines, and never thought it would evolve into the current situation. There's no way anyone in this world would want to be written into a story with a score of 008. Leonardo gave a helpless smile. In the days that followed, Leonardo remained unremarkable. He doesn't get involved in any strange events, nor does he participate in Beander's circle. His daily routine consists of going between City Hall and home. After attending the council meeting in the morning, he stays at home, deducing various cases and playing the role of student of ratiocination. Friday arrived, and Leonardo was considering whether to lay low for a while, skip Backland, and ask Count Hall for leave. After trying various divination methods, Leonardo received the message that there was some danger, so he simply wrote to Count Hall to cancel his class for the week. He leaned back in his armchair, his tireless reasoning exhausting his mind, so Leonardo simply closed his eyes and cleared his mind. Nothing major has happened lately, and this relaxed feeling is making Leonardo almost have the illusion that he has already left the 008 story. However, the only thing to note is that John Maynard has not attended Parliament for many days, and his health seems to be getting weaker day by day. Although Leonardo maintained a cooperative relationship with John, avoiding involvement in his personal affairs, John's prolonged absence still made him feel somewhat uneasy. So he sent Drake to find out about John's health. Congressman John Maynard seems to be in much better health lately, his complexion is rosy and he doesn't look sick at all. He asked me to pass on a message to you, sir. He said he will be back in Parliament and back to work next week. Drake stood in front of the desk, reporting his observations to Leonardo. Hearing this, Leonardo visibly felt relieved. On his desk, the pile of items changed from books to files. Leonardo looked at the file spread out at the top, which contained details of the previous disappearance of a female worker named Circe. During this period, Leonardo stopped doing everything himself and instead delegated tasks to Drake and Gawain. Bring Mr. Gao Wen up here. I have some questions for him. Yes, sir. Drake nodded in agreement and quickly went downstairs to lead Gawain to the study. Upon seeing Gawain's arrival, Leonardo spoke first. Have you found any clues about the female worker named Circe? Upon hearing Leonardo's question, Gawain quickly recalled the task Leonardo had assigned him a few days earlier. Leonardo's reason for not letting Drake investigate was that he was afraid that Beander was involved, and that Gawain, who was from Sequence 8 and had extensive experience, was obviously more reassuring. Not yet, Mayor Connor. It seems the case has been transferred to the Nighthawks. Leonardo nodded in response. Anyway, Dunn had already been promoted to Sequence 6, and ordinary Beander cases wouldn't cause much of a stir under the Nighthawks captain's command. All right, you may leave. After giving his instructions, Leonardo leaned back in his armchair and continued to clear his mind. Because the side effect of 2081 is that it causes the brain to engage in frantic thinking, Leonardo believes that clearing his mind when not using 2081 can effectively combat the side effects and prevent him from becoming an idiot. I'm more than halfway through digesting the potion for Sequence 8, student of ratiocination, and it's time for me to prepare to advance to Sequence 7, the beyond ingredient. Whenever Leonardo thinks about promotion, he regrets choosing the reader pathway. Although this pathway is in the late game, it is much more fragile in the early game than Leonardo had anticipated. However, he decided to persevere and get promoted as quickly as possible. Once he truly reaches the polymath of Sequence 6, his strength will experience a qualitative leap. As long as Leonardo has enough knowledge, once he reaches sequence 6, he will be able to simulate all sorts of Beyonder abilities, making his fighting style more diverse and unpredictable. Omniscience means omnipotence. 68 Cersei's death. On Saturday morning, Leonardo was suddenly awakened from his sleep by a commotion in his room. He had just opened the window and blew out his sleepy eyes when he saw that the alley not far from his house was inexplicably surrounded by police tape, and there were many onlookers around. After being promoted to student of ratiocination, Leonardo's observational skills improved significantly. He quickly noticed that among the crowd of onlookers, many citizens dressed in suits and evening gowns were gagging, covering their noses, their eyebrows furrowed, showing obvious disgust but still unable to resist their curiosity and standing on tiptoe. What major event has occurred? Leonardo put on his shirt, quickly washed up, and planned to go to the scene to find out what was going on. He had just stepped out of the door and was about to go downstairs when Drake, who had just returned from outside, stopped him. Drake's expression turned unusually serious. "Sir, Cersei has been found." Drake took a deep breath, as if he had thought of something terrifying. "She died in that alley." Apparently, a worker who was repairing the electrical circuits dug up the road and found the body underneath. The body was already rotting and stinking. Her genitals appeared to have been stabbed with a sharp object. The inspectors examined the body and determined that she had been dead for a full week. However, for some reason, her face hadn't been eaten by maggots and was relatively well preserved. Her expression was one of extreme pain, as if she had been tortured to death. "She is a believer in the goddess, may she rest in peace in the kingdom of God." Drake described to Leonardo what he had seen and heard that morning, taking deep breaths to stay calm, suppressing his fear, and drawing a full moon on his chest. Leonardo felt a pang of heartache after hearing this, but he remained calm and instructed. "She is a qualified and excellent female worker. Go and help her family apply for a charitable fund." Leonardo wanted to say that Cersei was a perfect older sister, but considering that Drake didn't know anything about her family, he just silently added that in his mind. Leonardo couldn't help but recall Cersei's hard-working figure as he toiled in his own home. She was very thin and always had a hunched back. Most of the money she earned was used to support her younger brother's schooling, which led to malnutrition, a thin face, and noticeably sunken eyes. Her skin was rougher than that of women her age, but she had a pair of beautiful, kind eyes that were even more beautiful than those of many noble ladies. With a heavy heart, Leonardo walked out of the main door, intending to go to the crime scene to maintain order. Since Gawain, the bodyguard, failed to help Leonardo fight in time on 2 separate occasions, he quickly caught up and arrived at the crime scene with Leonardo. The crowd was bustling. Since it was Saturday, many middle-class families did not need to return to work. They had planned to take a walk in the morning sunshine, but when they encountered this breaking news, curiosity overcame fear, and they stopped to watch. With Gawain's towering figure protecting him, Leonardo finally managed to squeeze through a path. Leonardo saw many familiar faces here. Inspector Toll, corpse collector Fry, midnight poet Leonard, and trainee Inspector Klein. Leonardo's sudden appearance instantly drew the attention of the 3 people except Fry. Inspector Toll was the first to step forward. His tone was somewhat heavy, but he still unconsciously tried to ingratiate himself with Leonardo. "Mayor Connor, she is." "No need, I roughly understand what happened. Go and disperse the crowd." Leonardo interrupted Toller, looked past him, and turned to look at Leonard and Klein standing to the side. "Did you find anything?" The 2 men bowed, their tone equally somber, but as Nighthawks, they were used to similar events and had even seen more terrifying things, so their tone was more composed. "No, we can't find any clues." "That's strange. It seems like a repeat offender," Leonard explained. Klein gestured with his chin towards the surrounding crowd, then spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. Leonardo instantly understood what he meant. Klein meant that there were too many ordinary people around, making it impossible to use Beyander's methods to find the real culprit. Fry still crouched beside Cersei's body, his white gloves filthy, yet he still had a full moon drawn on his chest, murmuring the name of Evernight Goddess. Leonardo stepped forward and saw the true appearance of the corpse. In the gaping hole in the asphalt road, Cersei's corpse, like a blasphemous creation vomited out by the earth, was covered in green bodily fluids, rotting and stinking. Her genitals were filthy and difficult to look at, her arms and calves were much more swollen than usual, and she had completely lost her former thin and frail appearance. Her eyes were wide open, her eyeballs almost popping out, her mouth was agape in an O shape, and the corners of her mouth were torn, revealing flesh and blood, as if she had died in extreme fear. Despite feeling nauseous, Leonardo asked Fry, who was squatting beside the corpse, "Is the beyond factor involved?" Only then did Fry slowly get up, His bloodless panel looked particularly cold in the morning sunlight. Have. His answer was very brief. Leonardo nodded in response. More police officers arrived at the scene and dispersed the onlookers. Leonardo looked at Klein, about to speak and ask him to use divination to explore the truth, but was interrupted by a voice behind him. Elder sister. The voice was full of anger and desolation, yet still retained a childlike innocence as it roared out. Looking back, there was a young man dressed simply but in spotless clothes. This must be James, Cersei's brother. He must be very sad right now. Just as Leonardo was about to offer some words of comfort, James suddenly went berserk and lunged at Leonardo viciously. It's you. You're the murderer. You killed my sister. You pervert. You must have had evil intentions towards my sister. James was pinned to the ground by Gawain. His eyes were bloodshot, and even though his shoulders and neck were being locked painfully by Gawain, he still roared and howled. Gawain held James tightly, who was blinded by rage, until the other man lost all his strength and was left only with heartbroken sorrow. He lay on the ground, his fair face still stained with mud, and wailed loudly. I am equally heartbroken by your sister's death. She was an excellent worker, and I am grateful for all the help she gave me. May she rest in God's kingdom. Leonardo offered a few words of comfort, then looked at Klein and gestured for him to use divination to find the real culprit. The man is already dead. All Leonardo can do, besides helping Cersei's impoverished family as much as possible, is to quickly find the real culprit and make them pay for their crimes. With the help of Gawain and several police officers, James was finally dragged to an open space to the side, where he was left to cry loudly. A man's voice is naturally deep, but when the volume exceeds its limit, it becomes hoarse, and then, it becomes voiceless. James's cries echoed through the alley. The morning sunlight was indeed gentle, but it seemed out of place at that moment. His crying lasted for a long time before finally stopping, but the act of crying did not stop. Klein leaned against the wall behind him and fell asleep, entering a dream. Leonard remained silent, his expression grave. Fry found a white sheet and covered Cersei's body with it. His white-gloved hand gently stroked the corner of Cersei's eye and closed his eyelids. In the somewhat stagnant and suffocating air, Leonardo suddenly turned his head to look at James. He didn't see James's brown pupils, but only a pair of white eyes filled with bloodshot veins and hatred. Leonardo sighed and looked away. 69 Revenge. Through dream divination, Klein successfully found clues and identified the real culprit. It was indeed caused by a Beander, who seems to be the same person who killed Annie Hina last time, and has extensive experience in committing crimes. His name is Caspian Reed, he lives in the Halleys neighborhood, and is ostensibly a fabric merchant. Even though Leonardo wasn't a member of the Nighthawks, Klein still readily shared all the clues he had obtained from his divination. What puzzled Leonardo was that he was clearly not a member of the Nighthawks, so why would Klein so openly tell him the truth in front of him? Blackthorn Security Company should have some level of confidentiality, right? Even if Leonardo wanted to know the truth, he should only be able to find out after the real culprit is apprehended. Is this based on some kind of trust? Leonardo wondered to himself, somewhat puzzled. While he was pondering this, Klein, Leonard, and Fry had already boarded a horse-drawn carriage and headed towards the Halls district. Leonardo didn't pay much attention, walked out of the alley, and instructed Inspector Toll, who was in charge of guarding the area. Prepare for the victim's burial. I'll pay for it. Leonardo glanced at James, who was still crouching in the shadows, sobbing uncontrollably. I also paid for the psychiatrist to help him with counseling. As you command, Toll replied respectfully. After giving his instructions, Leonardo planned to take Gawain back home. As soon as Leonardo entered the house, he received a letter from Elizabeth. The letter stated that Elizabeth had been pricked by thorns in the castle while vacationing in the town of Ramond and had been suffering from nightmares ever since. In my dreams, I always encounter a knight dressed in full black armor. He carries a huge broadsword, and his face is completely covered by the visor of his helmet, except for a pair of eyes that flash red light. He keeps trying to get closer to me, and I run away in fear, but the distance gets closer and closer each time. Leonardo's thinking was a little slow, but he immediately recalled the plot of the original book. In the original book, when Elizabeth was troubled by nightmares, she went to a fortune-telling club to find a solution and discovered Klein's secret job as a seer. Still feeling somewhat heavy-hearted, Leonardo felt helpless and powerless to help Elizabeth in her predicament, so in his reply he suggested that Elizabeth go to the divination club to seek a solution. After sealing the reply, Leonardo leaned back in his armchair in the study, feeling a heavy heart and a mind that was not as clear as before, his thoughts becoming very sluggish. Is this a side effect of 2081? It seems that emptying my mind isn't working very well. Of course, it's also possible that Cersei's sudden death made me feel down and unable to think. Leonardo was thinking when a thought suddenly popped into his head. How about I go for a walk? It seems like I haven't really looked at Tingen properly since I transmigrated. I've also hardly tasted any of the local specialties. Leonardo composed himself, went downstairs again, and planned to wander around the door. Gao Wenggong tried to follow, but was stopped by him. Leonardo, whose thoughts were sluggish, clearly hesitated for a moment. Ah, Mr. Gawain, you don't need to follow me. I shouldn't encounter any danger. Go and help the police department give Cersei a proper burial. Leonardo re-entered the door and returned to the alley where Cersei's body had been found. He suddenly realized something, recalling the crucial point he had failed to notice at the time. He stood in the sunlight at the alley entrance, his gaze fixed on the deep, dark shadows. Klein said the killer this time is the same person who killed Annie Hina. That's impossible. I clearly used the spirituality fog to perform a divination interference, so theoretically Klein shouldn't have been able to know who the murderer was. Even though he still performed a divination after the spirituality fog failed, he should have divined that I was the murderer. I shot and killed Annie Hina. How could I possibly be the murderer of Cersei? Leonardo stood there, stunned. Given Klein's personality, he would never utter a baseless guess under such a serious circumstances. Leonardo felt that there seemed to be a big problem here. But soon, his thinking became sluggish again, and he found it difficult to think. He suddenly turned his gaze to the corner of Howard Street, to the famous Coastline restaurant. This restaurant specializes in southern Chinese cuisine and is a well-known establishment frequently featured in newspapers. The average cost per person is £1.50. As if an invisible force was driving Leonardo, he, who had already eaten breakfast, strode toward the lunch restaurant. East Borough, Ulsner Street. Inside the two-story villa with a courtyard, Sharon Hoy lay on the bouncy, gold-threaded bed in the arms of an older man. A faint, delicate fragrance wafted through the room, a feminine scent that could make one's heart race. Do you need me to help you with Leonardo Connor? The middle-aged man on the bed frowned and shook his head, saying, unless you can guarantee that you won't leave a trace, but that's impossible, and what can you do about it? I didn't expect this little guy to be so tenacious. Back then, John Maynard and I plotted an assassination, but we still couldn't kill him. Sigh, the Annie you introduced was also a good girl, but unfortunately, she failed and lost her life. The man reached out and stroked the air in midair, as if recalling something soft. Mrs. Sharon placed his hand on her slender waist. Jeffrey, why are you so eager to become mayor? Jeffrey's gray eyes suddenly dimmed. If it weren't for that old man Franstone, I would have been the mayor of Tingen City years ago. But now, I can't even kill his son who only cares about women, and John has even betrayed me. Don't you find that ridiculous? John, that extremely greedy guy, actually started a charity foundation. Mrs. Sharon smiled and didn't delve into the topic further. Her nightgown was half fallen off, and her beautiful figure was vaguely visible as she straddled Jeffrey's hips. Time has shifted from morning to afternoon on Iron Cross Street. After his sister Cersei's funeral, James, who had been counseled by Dr. Dust Gudrian, lay on a wooden plank bed in a small, enclosed room, staring blankly at the ceiling. At that moment, he suddenly smelled a delicate fragrance. His sister's image flashed through his mind, and he recalled all the things they had experienced together on this bed. He lay on his side in an embracing position, holding the air, yet his feelings were genuine, as if he were truly caressing his deceased sister. He closed his eyes tightly, one hand inside his pants, the other stroking the air, but suddenly froze. His fingertips paused on the layers of hair, the touch was so real, and the fragrance suddenly filled his nostrils. He lifted his eyelids, and in his bloodshot, sorrowful eyes, he saw that familiar face. Sister? James asked tentatively, his tone clearly excited. That familiar face spoke in that familiar tone. Do you want to avenge your sister? At that moment, James's vision seemed to dissipate like bubbles, revealing a stunningly beautiful and alluring face. Surprisingly, James was not startled, his fingers rubbed back and forth on the strange woman's body. Think. A smile appeared on her charming face, her eyes slightly narrowed, captivating the heart. Her figure suddenly vanished, merging into the shadows of James's embrace. When she reappeared, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, her body bare. Sunlight streamed through the small window, making the woman's figure appear even more alluring. She was holding a porcelain cup in her hands, without anyone noticing. Inside the porcelain cup, a viscous, purplish-black liquid exuded an alluring aroma. The woman's red lips parted slightly. Here, drink it. Drinking this will avenge your sister Cersei. 70 The Big Bang. Leaving the Coastline restaurant, Leonardo felt like he'd had an exceptionally unlucky day. He almost choked on a fish bone while he was enjoying the specialty fish. While drinking black tea, I found a shard of porcelain in the teacup and almost cut my tongue. So, as he walked home, he concentrated, using meditation to clear his mind and think about all the things that were wrong. First, there was Klein's unusual behavior. He actually made a baseless guess in front of everyone. Then comes Leonardo's own condition. He always felt that there was an invisible force pulling him out of his doorway and onto the street, to the coastline restaurant. Despite not feeling hungry, he still finished a large meal, which cost a full £2. Then, during the meal, I was almost assassinated by fish bones and shards of porcelain. He touched his forehead to make sure he didn't have a fever, and continued to think. Suddenly, he remembered 008 and the various coincidences he had encountered a few days ago when facing out-of-control individuals. Old Neil tripping and falling into danger is just as coincidental as me getting a fishbone stuck in my throat, isn't it? Leonardo suddenly realized that although he had made a decision not to leave the door for a while, he had gone out today because of Circe's death, and was even drawn by an unseen force to go out for a meal, which was quite unusual for him. Could it be that the discovery of Circe's body near my house was also a coincidence created by 008? Thinking this through, Leonardo seemed to have grasped the key point and pulled himself out of his thoughts. Only then did he realize that he had turned down street after street and entered several alleys. Before he knew it, he had arrived in the factory district. There are no villas or mansions in the north or west districts here, only massive, dark, abandoned factories. The streets were filthy and muddy, and Leonardo's clean shirt and vest stood out starkly against the backdrop of coarse cloth clothes and tattered jackets. The air was thick with the pungent smell of nitric acid and sulfur, causing Leonardo to instinctively cover his mouth and nose. Before him stood the Tingen City Steel Complex, founded by John Maynard. The factory walls, built of red bricks and stones, are now covered with mottled black patches from years of smoke and fire. At the top of the factory is a huge chimney from which billowing, ink-like exhaust fumes stretch to the horizon. Inside the factory, the behemoth-like industrial robots hummed and groaned as workers swung hammers, slamming them down on the robots, which emitted a piercing buzz. At that moment, Leonardo, who was standing outside the factory, suddenly moved his feet, but stopped in midair. What am I doing here? Should I go in? Why should I go in? Countless doubts welled up in Leonardo's heart. He quickly stopped and took 2 steps back. His every move was observed by the workers, and many of the older workers who were still working in the factory quickly noticed the blonde, blue-eyed figure on the street. Mayor Connor, a worker wearing a shirt and denim overalls, quickly stepped forward, took off his worker's hat, revealing his head, which was bright enough to reflect sunlight, and, imitating the etiquette of nobles, removed his hat and bowed. Leonardo nodded slightly in response. The worker patted the dust off his palms on his dirty shirt, which obviously did little to help, but he still grinned, revealing 2 rows of chipped, yellow teeth. May I shake your hand? Thanks to you for leading Parliament to pass the Protection Bill, and thank you for establishing the Charity Foundation. This has made my family happier and happier. When the topic of family came up, the worker clearly looked longing for it, his smile barely concealed. My child is finally free from these heavy jobs in the factory. Today is Saturday, and he is only 12 years old. He has gone to the church school to learn. You can call me, Yellow Teeth, Ender, that's what everyone calls me. My child is lovely and adores you. He has always wanted to meet you in person if you come again. Yellow Teeth, Ender beamed with a smile as he spoke at length. But as Leonardo stood there, he felt a vague unease, a sense that something was wrong. However, he still accepted the hand that, Yellow Teeth, Ender extended. Mr. Ender, I will come often, and I look forward to meeting your child. I believe that if he is a boy, he will have a magnificent figure. If she is a girl, she will have fine character. After Leonardo finished speaking, he tried to break free from his arm, only to find that his strength was negligible in front of, Yellow Teeth, Ender. He gritted his teeth and tried to pull his hand back, but he couldn't. He could only let the other person hold his hand tightly. At this moment, Yellow Tooth, Ender once again revealed his chipped yellow teeth. He was incredibly strong, even comparable to the combat-type Beander from Sequence 9. As he pulled Leonardo into the factory for a tour, he said, Mayor Connor, my coworkers really want to meet you. They believe you are the perfect believer of the 7 gods, and that you represent the will of the 7 gods. Hey, you'd never guess, they even believe that praying to you will bring them divine blessings without any rituals. Leonardo didn't move, but his body was still dragged to the front of the steel factory. His feet left noticeable dents in the muddy ground. No, something's not right here, I absolutely can't go in. Leonardo's unease grew stronger. So, the moment, Yellow Teeth, Onder walked into the factory and let go of him, Leonardo's fingertip 2081 glowed. He took 2 steps back, disappearing into the shadows. When he reappeared, he was already in the shadows across the street. Leonardo just simulated Assassin's shadow movement ability to escape. He stood in the shadows, watching the stunned, Yellow Teeth, Ender, who was looking around in bewilderment, hoping to find Leonardo. Onder was surrounded by workers wearing light gray work jackets, or V-neck shirts and denim overalls. The workers surrounded Onder, saying he was getting presbyopia and that he was hallucinating from exhaustion. Ender, however, was trying his best to defend himself to the others. He even blushed and raised his left hand and waved it in the air, claiming that it was the hand that had shaken hands with Mayor Connor. Leonardo used the shadows to partially obscure his vision, making himself difficult to spot. Forget it, I'd better go home first. Something's really wrong with me today. Leonardo had just turned around and lifted his leg to leave when he suddenly heard an explosion behind him that was loud enough to shatter eardrums. Bang! Immediately afterwards, the ground began to tremble, and the temperature of the surrounding air rose sharply, forming a rolling heat wave. Citizens and workers passing by frantically covered their heads and fled in panic. Leonardo instinctively turned around to look. Yellow Teeth, Ender, who was just arguing with the workers at the factory door, was engulfed in flames. The flames burned fiercely inside the factory and reacted with sulfur and nitric acid in the air, causing a violent explosion. Boom! The explosion rang out again, even louder and more deafening than the last one. The steel factory that was originally standing on the ground and deeply rooted in the soil was overturned by the heat wave. Countless pieces of steel burned in the air, scattered and fell, igniting the surrounding trees and houses. Fuck, what on earth is going on today? Leonardo was shocked, only to feel a heat wave carrying scorching flames rapidly sweeping towards him. The number 2081 between Leonardo's fingers has returned to its original color. His figure dispersed and disappeared like the moon reflected in the lake. August 16, 1349, Saturday. Tingen City United Steel Plant explosion. Nearly 100 workers in the factory died. Mayor Leonardo Connor was caught in the blast and is currently missing. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.